Howdy, howdy. Do you guys listen to the audio? Wow, it's been so long. I feel so weird doing this. It's been like a million years, but hi, welcome. I'm alive. Thank you all for being here, watching the stream. Jesus, I just can't believe it has been so long. And by so long, I mean like 2 weeks, but still for me, I don't know. I was live streaming every like 3 or 4 days and I was uploading content regularly. So, hello, Thomas. How are you doing, man? Thank you for being here. Gosh, this is amazing. I miss doing lives truly. Sorry if I cough. I had COVID. It was pretty rough for me. I don't know why. Uh, but yeah, sorry about the cough. It's a struggle. Gosh, I forgot how to do the chat. There we go. Beautiful. Perfect. Now we are ready. Things are good. How are you doing? I'm doing much better. I had some rough couple of weeks, uh, particularly because of COVID and just some other personal stuff was pretty bad. So combining all of that, I had a pretty rough couple of weeks. But other than that, right now I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing much better when it comes to my health, both physical and mental. So I hope that y'all are okay too. And I'm in a much better place, man. I swear. And I think everything's good. The picture, the audio. Gosh, I don't know how the algorithm is gonna react, but I was thinking about starting with some of the Ukraine stuff. It's been a couple of weeks. This war has been quite something, right? We have. I don't know what you guys think, but a lot of the stuff in Ukraine doesn't look that different from 2 weeks ago, and most of the action I think has been surrounding Kiev. And I think what I've heard is Vladimir Putin is really eager to capture Kiev to get this war over. I heard on the news that Russia is defaulting on its debt. Russia can't pay its foreign debt. Now, that's a pretty significant thing. Russia is out of money, literally. So we have President Zelensky joining the PMs of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovenia, of all places, which is kind of weird. Slovenia is kind of far. Well, it's extremely far. So I don't know why would he meet with the Prime Minister of Slovenia. But okay, man, it's your call. Uh, and yeah, so they are making advances on Kiev, I guess, I think, but it doesn't look very significant. And other than that, the south, around the area around Crimea, looks also pretty much the same. I mean, probably with some advances, but nothing too aggressive, I think. What do you guys think? Like, it's not. Here's Luhansk. I don't know how you fucking pronounce that stuff. Luhansk, Luxans. I've heard a lot of pronunciations, all right, but I'm already struggling with English though. So, and it's already like marked independent. So is this is gonna get through? I really wonder what's gonna happen. What's gonna be the resolution to this conflict? Because I don't think Ukraine wants to give up this territory, and Russia is literally running out of money. So things are pretty intense. Looks like a stalemate in some areas. Also, they still have cities under siege. That's true though. They do have some cities under siege, but it looks like a stalemate. I'm really surprised about the fighting capability of Ukraine, though. Which, I mean, good for them. I guess all that international support, all the sanctions have worked on Russia, and all the, I don't know, giving weapons to Ukraine has worked, and military training, and just the brave, brave people on the Ukrainian side that are fighting for their country. Uh, but yeah, hopefully nothing will happen. I wasn't gonna touch a lot on Ukraine. Yeah, this is more of a reaction. Oh shit, more of a reaction stream. But I just wanted to see what happened because I was so focused on COVID and other things that I really wasn't paying much attention to Ukraine other than like Twitter and stuff, you know? But we can start with a reaction. Thomas, I think you are like my only viewer right now. So what do you want to watch? We can watch Geography Now, Tanzania. Uh, we can watch some What If China Was Never Colonized? Looks interesting. 12 Insane Wars You've Never Heard of. How much land did Europeans really discover? We can even watch some oversimplified, you know? I think there were some... some oversimplified videos that I haven't watched.
This video was made possible.
So, I think I haven't watched... The War of the Bucket. I don't think I have watched that. The Three Kingdoms. I haven't watched that for sure. Oh, Henry VIII. I haven't watched that either. I don't know, man. It's really like a lot. 12 wars. Then it's up to you. Oh, awesome. 12 insane wars you've never heard of from What If Alt list. No, What If Alt. Fuck, man. What a fucking... your name's hard, bro, honestly. I always forget the audio. There we go.
Basically no history, and even most history buffs are normally clustered on a handful of topics like World War II or the Roman Empire. The sad thing here is that a lot of truly incredible events just end up falling through the cracks. Across history, there have been countless absolutely incredible wars with great battles that determined history.
That's true. What do you guys think? You know, I've heard this argument before. Obviously, a lot of people pay too much attention to World War II. I think, obviously, World War II is relatively recent, you know, less than 100 years, like something like 80 years. So, you know, maybe that's why it's incredibly huge, incredibly important. But maybe we do pay too much attention to World War II, you know?
But they've been forgotten.
Maybe. I don't know.
This is a video to honor those. These are 12 incredible wars across history that you've probably never heard of. My main criteria for this is combining the historical impact of the war with how big it was and how generally interesting it is. For obscurity, I'm trying to gear this for a low-level history buff, but there are plenty of wars here that even hardcore history buffs have almost...
Low-level history? Bro, what are you trying to tell me, man? Are you trying to call me stupid? Because I kind of am.
Never heard of. This is in no particular order, so let's get started.
Let's go!
Hi, I'm Rudyard, the guy behind What If Alt Hist, and wars are expensive.
Shit! It's the guy from the video. Holy shit, I don't think we ever... Have we ever seen him? I don't think so, man. Is this like a face reveal? Good for him, man. I don't know.
I mean, so many wars across history were lost due to bad financial management. And this is where our sponsor, Truebill comes in.
Truebill's an all-in-one personal finance platform that lets you...
I mean, go check his sponsors and, you know, his
when I'm over Louis the
link.
Truebill now. Click the link.
You know, support the original creator, obviously.
Number 1, the Taiping Rebellion. This is the third bloodiest war in history. We think it killed about 30 million people, or nearly double World War I. That's not even the craziest thing. This was a war fought by a man who thought he was the second coming of Christ that led a communist revolution. Wait, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, how have I never heard of this? Mid-19th century China was a mess. The country was so intensely overpopulated that...
Is it the 19th century that China calls the century of humiliation? I think the 19th century was pretty rough for China, both internally and externally, you know, with foreign powers particularly. And yeah, I think I've heard a little bit about this war, but not a whole lot.
At the same time, the country had fallen technologically behind the West, and China had just faced a humiliating defeat to the British in the Opium Wars.
Yeah.
Enter Hong Shuquan, a South Chinese peasant who, after meeting with an American missionary from Kentucky, had dreams where he believed himself to be the second son of Christ, destined to form a new religion and liberate China from its Manchu barbarian overlords. He was able to muster an army of peasants and bandits that marched across south-central China, seizing the city of Nanjing to form a new heavenly kingdom that was built on gender equality, free love, and communism. The Taipings ran out of initiative.
I mean, sounds good to me.
When they tried to seize the imperial capital of Beijing, and the government's Mongol horse archer cavalry and the winter weather wiped out their army. The rest of the war was basically a bloody multi-year slog as the imperial forces tried to grind down the Taiping rebels. Some highlights of the war was that an imperial commander called Zheng Guofan was sent to his home province of Hunan to fight off the Taiping rebellions, and then built an army that defeated the Taipings literally from just talking to neighbors and getting friends of friends to join. The Imperials also had a white, largely American and British mercenary force that were the spear tip of their army, and by the time the Taiping capital was seized, Hong Shuquan had gone totally insane, pretending that no war was secretly...
Really? Like, he went insane from the beginning. You know, like, what? He was... what did he said? He was second... coming of Christ, something about that. I mean, that's pretty crazy, man. He was crazy from the very beginning. Talk about stupid wars, you know, or stupid reasons why war started. I think this is
secretly going on outside, almost like
and the third bloodiest war too. I mean,
putting out religious edicts and smoking opium in his massive harem. Number 2, Demetrius's invasion of India. Now, this is a war you almost never hear about.
Yep.
You see, India didn't have historical records before around 1000
I haven't
AD
heard about
when the
this
Muslims
one.
invaded, so you could technically have an Indian Genghis Khan that we would have never heard of. However, long story short, after the fall of Alexander the Great's empire, a Greek colonial state developed in modern Afghanistan that later spread to Pakistan. Very surprisingly,
a Greek colonial state in Afghanistan. That's something you never really hear about.
Kingdom converted to Buddhism. We can piece together that a great conqueror from this Greek-Afghan kingdom conquered across the whole north of India in the 2nd century BC. His armies reached nearly to the edge of Bangladesh before he died, which would have made him one of the great conquerors in India.
In the Second Opium War, the British and the French forces captured the Qing main residence called the All Summer Palace. The British and the French troops looted and burned it. Damn, talk about, again, I guess, part of the century of humiliation, though. That's pretty rough, though. Especially for the Chinese, I guess.
Possibly all of world history. However, since records are so poor, that's all we know. Number 3, the Anlushan Rebellion.
Okay, that's it, I guess.
Of the 10 bloodiest wars in history, 8 were fought predominantly in China. I had to cut a lot of Chinese...
Okay, so the first we have World War II, then the Mongol conquest of northern China, Taiping Rebellion, Manchu conquest of China. China has truly has had many. I mean, the only ones that aren't Chinese are the Russian Civil War, World War I, World War II kind of was fought in China too.
Chinese wars from this list, since I think a lot of them have very little impact outside China, and Western audiences
just kind of hard to imagine, like,
wouldn't find them interesting. But this really deserves a place here.
Yeah.
In the 8th century, China was the wealthiest and most powerful nation in the world. The Tang dynasty controlled a giant empire that stretched deep into Central Asia, largely by co-opting Central Asian peoples into their empire to do the fighting. This resulted in a balance of power between the Central Asian military commanders and the civilian Han Chinese government. Here comes An Lushan, a commander from modern-day Uzbekistan. He was a general in the Chinese army on China's northeastern frontier with the Mongols. An was ambitious and had built up an alliance structure with other commanders.
You kind of could ask the question. The Chinese population. China has always had a massive population, at least compared to other nations, right? I think for one thing, it has been a good thing because China has been hugely influential in global culture and global history, right? But at the same time, that means that the more people you have, the bloodiest your wars are going to be. So it's kind of a double-edged sword if you think about it.
And the emperor felt threatened by this and tried to have him fired, which just resulted in An rebelling, burning the Chinese capital down and killing the emperor. There are a couple funny side notes in the story, with one being that An was morbidly
Everyone
obese,
wants to get to the Chinese
rumor
capital.
was that he was having an affair with the emperor's favorite concubine, who was considered one of the most beautiful
Yo,
women of
Oired,
time,
how are you?
where she would dress him up as a baby. The imperial...
Oired, Jahira, good to see y'all. No, you're not late. We're literally just begun. Thank you for being here, man. I miss y'all too a lot.
Were able to assassinate
You have no
An
idea.
after he took the capital, but he was so fat the knife wasn't able to cut through his fat, making his death long and protracted. After An's death, both him...
No way. he was so fat. That reminds me of the story of Howard Taft, the U.S. president, that apparently, and this is not a real story, I think, but apparently Taft was so fat that he couldn't fit into the White House bathtub. So that's pretty interesting, and this is pretty horrific.
The emperor's sons kept the war going. The war went on for years, racking up an unimaginable death toll of over 20 million, which is over 5 million more than World War I. And remember, this is the early Middle Ages when China had a population somewhere in the range of 70 million. The Anlushan Rebellion thus was a big inflection point in all of Chinese history.
That's like 1/4 of the population.
Empires based off
fucking
alliances
insane,
with Central Asian tribes just stopped working. The bureaucrats gained total power over society, Buddhism lost it to Confucianism, and every ethnic Han regime afterwards was isolationist. Number 4, the Second Congo War. This war is technically still happening, and horrifyingly, it's the bloodiest war since World War II.
Yeah.
In the 1990s, Central Africa was experiencing acute overpopulation. This meant that the genocide in Rwanda resulted in people fleeing to related tribes in the Congo, which, through cascading effects, resulted in the Democratic Republic of Congo collapsing as a sort of functioning nation. Rwandan-based Tutsi rebels attacked west across their country, making their way against the government forces to the outskirts of the capital Kinshasa, which is legitimately impressive considering the Congo is the size of Western Europe.
Yeah, exactly. What do you guys think that is? Chinese wars being so brutal. Is it something about the Chinese warlords or emperors or leaders in general? Is it just the sheer size of the Chinese population that makes them naturally brutal? You just gotta wonder, man. And this Congo wars in general have also been pretty.
This is called Africa's World
insane.
War, since countless countries, including Sudan and Angola, got involved
and
in
Israel,
order to get in on the action or protect their borders.
No comments.
This war was so horrifying that it saw the collapse of society and sort of stable government to be replaced by a Mad Max package of warlord slavery, child soldiers, genocide against pygmies, and stuff like that. Armies would wander the countryside, raping, pillaging, and feeding off the local population.
Well, there goes the monetization.
Was that they were in fact supplying the coltan that goes into our smartphones during the computer revolution. The hated leader of the government forces died while the government forces started to beat the Rwandan rebels.
It's kind of unfortunate, isn't it? A lot of what we have in our phones comes from places that literally have wars. And it's kind of sad to think that in order to get this phone, maybe someone lost their lives. I don't know. It's pretty disturbing in a way.
Some warlords are still independent even today, however, and so the remnants of the war continues. Number 5, the Imgen War.
I have no idea about this one.
The 16th century was the main country in Asia that was able to technologically adapt to the West. The Japanese had implemented Western-style muskets, formations, and the like, alongside their naturally incredible samurai, to form what was probably the best army in the world at the time.
Badass.
Japan had also just finished their civil war and was burning with energy as their shogun, or basically military dictator, Hideyoshi, planned an attack on Korea that would hopefully become the springboard for a conquest of China and all of East Asia.
Japan going after Korea
had a
since
quick series of victories,
times.
seizing control of much of the country rapidly. However, the tide of war was
kind of the
turned
Japanese
literally
thing to do.
and figuratively by probably one of the greatest military commanders of all time, Yi Sun-sin. Yi won the Battle of Mianyongyang Strait, God, I hope I pronounced that correctly, in which his 13 ships were able to wipe out 330 Japanese ships. And some of those brilliant tactical moves in history, the Koreans got the Japanese fleet stuck in a tidal pool in which they rammed into each other. This was a veritable Salamis of the Orient, in which the Japanese naval defeats meant they had trouble supplying their army. An interesting side note is that the Koreans had these precursors to ironclads called turtle boats that they would fight the Japanese with. As the war dragged on for years, the Chinese, who were the vassal overlords of the Koreans, were able to reinforce the Korean peninsula, thus meaning the Japanese were unable to conquer Korea. This defeat, compounded by the death of the Japanese commander Hideyoshi, meant that Japan stopped expanding.
Admiral Yi was a gigachad.
Tokugawa
sounds
power
like it,
and
my
turned
guy.
Japan inwards
Sounds
and
like
rejected Western technology for centuries, thus stalling the rise of the Japanese Empire by centuries. Number 6, the War of the Triple Alliance.
Oh, yes! I know a lot about this one. Paraguay as a country almost got extinct after this war. It was so brutal that It almost...
For every Napoleon,
yeah.
Alexander, or Genghis Khan, there are like 5 wannabes. Saddam Hussein's, Napoleon III's, or Gaddafi's.
Yeah.
However, the figure who takes the cake for the most delusional attempt at world conquest is a certain Francisco Solano.
Imagine being tiny Paraguay, fighting a war against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. What? Why? Who thought? Well, apparently this guy thought that was a good idea, but it was fucking horrible.
Dictator of 19th century Paraguay. He believed himself to be the South American Napoleon and was supporting a side in the Uruguayan Civil War. When that side lost, he decided to save them, but the little problem
was... I mean, considering the size of Paraguay, he kind of did fairly well, but it was a war they were never going to win.
That Paraguay was hundreds of miles from Uruguay, divided between it by Argentina and Brazil, countries that together have 27 times Paraguay's population. However, he did start that war with the triple alliance of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay forming against little Paraguay. The Paraguayan military was far better than the others and actually made some admirable conquests before they were inevitably forced on the defensive. This war was absolutely brutal for Paraguay, so much so that practically every male in the country fought. 70% of its male population died. With Solano Lopez wandering around the capital, pistol in hand, ordering any man he saw to fight in the front. Rumor has it polygamy took root in Paraguay afterwards to make up for the lack of men. Number 7, the Great Northern War.
Imagine that. I was just watching a video about this conflict, never heard of it, and it was brutal, so brutal. 70% of the men inside that country died. Imagine that. You know, just the fucking problems. This set back Paraguay like more than 100 years. This was so brutal for the population, for the country. And it would never really recover. You don't hear a lot about Paraguay. And Paraguay, to be fair, had a fairly good military. They could have been a much better, much greater nation than they are today. And the Triple Alliance War, or the War of the Triple Alliance, was what set them back. And
God, the comparison of this war to
I've heard a little bit about this one too.
Geopolitically, the year 1700 was a weird place. It was a world where Germany was a chessboard that other countries fought over, and Russia was a medieval backwater, while Poland controlled most of Eastern Europe, and the Swedes were the dominant military power. Sweden had been ruled by military geniuses for the last 50 or so years, and had a sort of military hegemony over the region. When the king of Sweden died, he was replaced by a 16-year-old boy. In a drunken brawl, the kings of Denmark and...
I watched the meme about the Paraguayan War. I think there's a good meme about it in Spanish, not in... Let me see. I think it's this one. Okay, this is basically a summary of the Paraguayan War, all right? The British, of course. Yeah, so you can basically see how this pretty much feels to the Paraguayans.
Russia, later teaming up with Poland, Lithuania, and Saxony, agreed this was the time to take Sweden on and unseat its dominance. However, little did they know that the boy king of Sweden, Charles XII, just happened to be one of the greatest geniuses in military history.
Wow.
Charles, in a series of brilliant campaigns, defeated the Russians, Danes, Polish, and Saxon forces, seizing control of all of Scandinavia and most
And he was
of
like
Eastern
young,
Europe.
wasn't he?
Considering Sweden had such a small population compared to its opponents.
That's also true. You know, that it's amazing that Paraguay wasn't annexed.
It was normal to fight battles severely outnumbered. He then built up a massive army and launched an invasion of Russia. Charles XII had gotten an agreement from Cossack
An invasion of Russia, man, for real?
Get their support and supplies, and so launched an invasion of Ukraine, where he met the Russian armies led by Peter the Great outside Kiev at the Battle of Poltava. You see, Peter the Great is probably the greatest leader in Russian history, and he effectively turned it from a backwards medieval country into a modern superpower, overhauling their bureaucracy, military, intellectual, and
I think out of the Great Northern War, Russia would eventually become winners and would launch Russia and Prussia to become global powers, right? While Sweden and Poland would really not. I think a U.S. president actually saved Paraguay. Really, that's Interesting. Probably true though. The U.S. Would be very involved in Latin America at the time.
Popular culture onto Western
I mean,
standards.
every
Thus, when
time.
Charles XII charged the Russian line at Poltava, he expected it to crumble like the peasant mobs he had faced a few years before at Narva. But the newly modernized Russian army crushed the Swedes, effectively winning the war in that battle. Charles XII fled south, where his allies the Ottomans imprisoned him for years. Meanwhile, the Swedes lost their empire and territory, so much so that it was really the last time the Swedes ever had an empire or even tried to. Long after the war, Charles XII was finally released by the Turks, and upon reaching Sweden, invaded Norway so that he could invade the British Isles, but died outside of Trondheim, thus passing a man who was practically the reincarnation of Alexander the Great. Number 8. The Fall of Assyria. Okay, to be...
Yeah, basically this war gave us a powerful Russia and a powerful Prussia. He didn't talk a lot about Prussia, but I think by defeating Poland, Prussia really became what it was, a great military power at the time. Well, I don't know if at the time. I found the meme. It's on Reddit. I can link it. Sure, man, send it. I don't know if the YouTube chat allows links, so maybe you'll have some troubles with it.
To be fair, this is kind of cheating in that this was a bunch of wars over a several decade period as the Assyrian Empire went from the greatest empire up to that point to a pile of rubble. However, it's been nearly 3,000 years since then, and there are so many epic wars that few of you have probably never heard of that I feel justified in doing this. Assyria in the 8th and 7th centuries BC was the most powerful country in the world in history. It controlled the whole Fertile Crescent region from Iran to Egypt. The Assyrian military was on the cutting edge of technology and was able to brutally crush any rebels. However, the Assyrians, like the later Germans in the 20th century, compensated for their wonderful military by horrible public relations that sparked widespread hatred. You start to see the decline of the Assyrian Empire with their failed invasion of Armenia, in which the Armenians drove them into the mountains in the winter as the Assyrians froze to death. Afterwards, the Assyrians only barely fought off invasions from the Sumerian and Scythian peoples from Ukraine, which broke upon the civilized world. This was the Iron Age equivalent of fighting off the Huns or Mongols, both of which nearly destroyed civilization in the region.
I don't know a lot about this war, but I have heard, obviously, that the Assyrian Empire was just the biggest empire at the time. He truly said it.
However, all of these bloody wars meant that Assyria was bleeding its own population white, while also the trajectory of empire was taking place in which the rich got much richer and the poor lost their properties, becoming debt slaves or urban proletariat.
Sounds familiar.
The Assyrian military became majority non-Assyrian, which is a bad combination for a nation that's widely hated. The Assyrians started to face constant rebellions from Egypt and Babylon.
I've been listening to podcasts about the ancient Middle East. It's amazing how the first empire was the Akkadian Empire that started about 2300 BC. Yeah. I don't know much about the time, to be honest, but I do recognize the names of the biggest empires. Truly an interesting time. Definitely should look more into it. Guest links don't work. Yeah, man, I don't know why. I haven't put any settings to get to ban links or something like that. It's just a YouTube thing.
Both nations that had histories of over 2,000 years.
And it sucks because I would love to
proud cultures.
Allow
links.
It's
kind of ludicrous without Pitbull or Tayo Cruz that in Egypt and Babylon, literally the same guys did the rebellion. Like Necho in Egypt, and I forget the Babylonian guy's name, would rebel, have their rebellions crushed, and then flee into the swamps only to emerge a couple years later to rebel again. Something that makes this even more impressive is that the Assyrians were absolutely brutal to defeated rebels. They literally made propaganda pieces about flaying the skins of defeated peoples or forcing fathers to mash the bones of their children. However, Assyria was so hated that the people kept on rebelling.
There goes the monetization.
Assyria ran out of steam, and a combined Babylonian and Egyptian rebellion, allied with the nomadic Median tribes, crushed them and destroyed their capital city of Nineveh. Nineveh, perhaps the largest city in the world at the time, was literally eviscerated off the face of the planet. The glass literally melted in the city. When a Greek army marched past the ruins of Nineveh 150 years later, the local inhabitants, the descendants of the Assyrians, had no idea who built the ruins. There's a kind of twisted poetry that goes from being the greatest empire to forgotten so quickly. 9. The Byzantine-Sasanian War. For 700 years, the Middle East was divided between a Greek-speaking Roman western half and a Persian-speaking eastern half. There was a permanently cold and sometimes pretty hot...
Maybe I could find a loophole by putting spaces before the dot. Maybe that would work, man. I
hopping
really
war
hope.
between the
I love to
Persians and
watch the meme,
Romans.
you know,
One of the
especially
best and
about
most
the
epic
Triple Alliance
examples of this
War.
was in the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire fell in a civil war, and the Persians took the opportunity to launch a lightning strike against the Middle East,
Anatolia,
seizing the Byzantine
well,
positions
the
in
Middle East.
Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, effectively conquering further than any Persian empire in nearly 1,000 years. The Persians allied with the Avar Confederacy, based out of modern Hungary, and attacked the empire from the Balkans. Both coordinated attacks.
That's nice. That's a very smart alliance.
The Byzantines, in fact, considered leaving Constantinople and fleeing to a new capital in Carthage in modern Tunisia. However, the Byzantines had an incredible emperor as their leader, Heraclius. Heraclius took his army by boat to northeastern Turkey and attacked the northern Persian Empire through Armenia, while the Persians were in turn bearing down the Byzantine capital. This made the Persians launch a coordinated siege of Constantinople with the Avars, with one sieging the European side and the other the Asian side, which was defeated by the Byzantines. The Byzantines then formed an alliance with the Turkic peoples of the Caucasus and attacked south into Iraq, nearly seizing the Persian capital of Ctesiphon before the Persians sued for peace. This war devastated the whole region, making the Romans and Persians both exhausted. Also, you've got to keep in mind, only a little bit before, half of the region's population had been killed by an earlier version of the Black Death. In effect, this war set up the region for the meteoric rise of the Islamic Caliphate that took place 50 years later.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense because both the Persian Empire and the Byzantines were so tired. Then, which was the first caliphate? Was it the Umayyad Caliphate? I think they were the first. I'm not extremely sure. So that's why, or that's at least a reason why they had such a fast rise. You know, if you look through the years, they conquered all this territory in a very, or at least a fairly quick time, which is respectable, right?
Number 10, the War of Spanish Succession.
Oh, I've heard about this one.
France was the beating heart of Europe in the early 18th century.
No, but it's so weird that even the streamer can't see it. Yeah, I can't see it. Like it's not showing. So maybe I'll check the settings. But again, I haven't moved anything when it comes to links and in the
French
chat.
philosophy was universally respected, while the French military was probably the best in the world and very nearly conquered Europe. The King of France was a certain Louis XIV, who I think is one of the most overrated kings in history, and his reign was marked by countless wars of expansion.
Controversial.
So many that my sobriety
Controversial
test was
choice.
to see if I can remember them in order. However, they all universally failed as the European system continually teamed up against the overpowered France. The Spanish Empire by this time was a walking corpse, but one that still covered every discovered continent. The King of Spain was called Charles the Hexed, or Cursed, which is a perfect example of why inbreeding.
Yeah. You're okay, bro? Yeah, man. Thank you, Gustav, for asking. I'm feeling better. Had a couple rough weeks, but thankfully things are much better now. Rashidun Caliphate was the first. Thank you. The Rashidids were the first. So yeah, you can see the inbred, just the inbred face, bro. The nose, the jaw, the everything, you know?
Breeding's bad. He was mentally stuck at the age of 6, autistic, a hunchback with an overbite that meant he could barely chew, and would randomly ejaculate. Since that last thing meant he couldn't have heirs, the crowns of Europe had already pre-divided up the massive Spanish Empire for after he would eventually die. However, out of bitterness, he just gave the whole thing to France. Adding the vast Spanish Empire to the already overpowered France seemed like a reasonable recipe for Roman Empire 2.0, and the rest of Europe was not happy. The Dutch,
Roman Empire
Austrians, most of
2.0.
Germany, and the
That's
British
a good
allied
analogy.
against the French. The French launched an attack in southern Germany to knock out Austria, which was already struggling to fight off a Hungarian rebellion. However, Britain just happened to have one of their greatest commanders of all time, John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, direct ancestor of Winston Churchill. Marlborough was able to
that sounded like a very familiar name right there.
The Dutch and bring his British army hundreds of miles from their bases into southern Germany to stop the French from wiping out the Austrians. He met the French at the Battle of Blenheim and trounced them. This was an era where fortresses were really powerful, which gave the defense a lot of advantages, and the rest of the war was basically an exercise in masochism, as both sides waged long sieges, and the French very gradually lost the war. The Austrians, meanwhile, invaded Spain, effectively showing how washed up the former superpower was. Number 11. The Rise of the Maorian Empire. The funny thing is not a single Indian record mentions Alexander the Great. It's kind of like how the Bible never mentions the pyramids. Which, I mean, relates back to what I said about Demetrius, is that they didn't really write down history before 1000 AD. However,
and again, also similar to China, India has always had a huge population. So I'm glad that he included an Indian War.
the fall of Alexander's
Haven't heard
empire
about this
had
one, to
profound
be
effects
honest.
on Indian history. As Alexander's armies left back over the mountains, leaving chaos in their wake, it created lots of opportunities for enterprising young men.
Oh shit.
Those opportunities were taken by Kautila and Chandragupta. Kautila was
Chandragupta,
professor
okay,
of
I've heard about
politics
that
and
one.
statecraft at the most prestigious Indian university at the time of Taxila, very much like an Indian Sun Tzu or Machiavelli. He met up with a wandering, dispossessed son of a chieftain who impressed him named Chandragupta. The two of them went into the woods that made up a large part of western India at the time and formed an army out of brigands. Combining Kautila's strategic genius and Chandragupta's...
Yeah, no, so I think I've heard about this one. I haven't heard about the name, but basically an empire trying to conquer most of India, right? I think we saw that on the history of the world, I guess, right? Chandragupta
leadership meant that their haphazard army was able to take over
I know,
all of
that's
India,
where I heard it.
even though much of his control was indirect and loose, especially in the south. This was no easy task, and that the armies of the established states they fought, like the Magadhan Empire, had armies numbering the tens of thousands
It's
of
also
elephants.
very interesting that they have elephants as like horses. Like Europeans used horses, they are using elephants. It looks pretty badass. I mean, there's 3 people shooting arrows. Elephants seem to be pretty resistant. What do you guys think? Do you think this is actually like a very good military decision?
Chariots. He also fought with the Seleucid or Greek descendant empire that ruled the Middle East, driving them from modern Pakistan and Afghanistan. Chandragupta and his descendants then went about...
Oh shit, really? Bro, in Germany today, the sky was orange. It was Sahara dust or something. Oh my god. Sounds like a very interesting phenomenon. Let's see if we can find like a picture or something like that. No news. There we go. Yeah. Holy shit. The UK, huge dust storm that turned the sky in Spain orange heading to England. Holy crap. So this was across Europe. In Spain. Germany, 1 person. Damn, must have been pretty interesting sight.
forming the Maorian Empire, which is India's answer to the Roman Empire, and Kautila became the dominant Indian political philosopher, so much that he intellectually practically dominated the field.
It's amazing how some people start with pretty much nothing, but by the time they pass away, they have an empire. True. It's truly, and again, it just gets to show you how much military genius plays in empires, right? A lot. Good leaders make amazing empires. It's only good against untamed levy armies, not against professionals. Okay, when they fought the Mastodons or the Romans, the elephants proved ineffective. I didn't knew that. Thank you, bro. Sounds
Until the British
makes a lot of
colonization.
sense, though.
Number 12, the 30 Years' War. I kind of hesitated putting this war on this list, given it's the most normie, but I think
The
it
most
deserves a
normie.
place. 17th century Europe was suffering from a secular crisis like we have now, with sky-high inequality, depressed standard of living, political polarization, corruption, and social collapse. However, rather
That
than
sounds
right
like
and left
today.
being the main dividing factor splitting the European continent, instead it was religion, which cut through nations, classes, and families between the Protestants and Catholics. Germany was not a unified country, but was a patchwork of tiny principalities, church territories, and city-states
Cities, duchies, imperial cities, you know, there
held
were a lot
together
of
under
things.
the loose leadership of the Catholic
Just a
Habsburg
fucking
Holy
mess,
Roman
bro.
emperors based out of Austria.
Are there
The way
any
the
good
title of
videos
emperor
about
was
the?
chosen was that there was an
Are there any good videos about the Holy Roman Empire?
electoral system where
I'd love to
different
watch
regions
some.
had different votes, and the Catholics held a loose
30
majority
Wars
and
was
just
horrible for
happened
Germany.
to always vote in the Catholic Habsburgs. However, what happened was that Bohemia, or modern Czechia, a majority Protestant
Bohemia.
area, got a Protestant ruling family.
Oh.
If that political decision went through, it would result in the Protestants gaining a majority, meaning the Habsburgs would lose power. The Austrian Habsburgs, who were sharing power with the Spanish Habsburgs,
Spanish Empire.
the world's superpower with colonies everywhere, launched an invasion of Bohemia, wiping out the Protestant forces at the Battle of White Mountain. Protestant Denmark, which
Danish
is widely
Empire.
viewed as the power of the future, then declared war on the Habsburgs.
I mean, not to brag,
The
but
Habsburgs had the
much
wonderful
smaller.
leadership of Wallenstein, who was like the literal definition of the military-industrial complex that utterly destroyed the Danes, even militarily occupying Denmark. The French, who, although were Catholic, were rivals of the Habsburgs, then paid Sweden to invade Germany to defeat the Habsburgs. The Swedes were led by the brilliant commander Gustavus Adolphus, who had been modernizing Sweden's military to make it the best
sounds
in the
pretty
world.
Swedish to me.
He destroyed the Catholic armies at Breitenfeld and Lutzen, heavily outnumbered, and his forces even reached Austria. It looked like he might seize Vienna, thus resulting in the Swedes conquering Central Europe, but he died at the Battle of Lutzen. The war then degraded into a bunch of nasty small campaigns. I mean, it's called the 30 Years' War.
The Holy Roman Empire was just one big border war. True. Absolutely true. It's pretty funny. Hey, glad to see you're back streaming. Thank you, man. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm pretty happy to be back streaming
I can't
too.
overstate how brutal this war was.
I really appreciate the support though, and all the people asking.
Were very good, and the strategy was to
it really
keep
means
the
a
enemy's
lot.
Economy dry, mostly by stealing from their population and raping a lot of peasants. A third of Germany's population, in some areas over 70% of the population, died, putting Germany in a 100-year recession. I've heard a really good argument from some people that Germany's character as a modern nation was formed by how traumatic the 30 Years' War was. As the war dragged on, the French were
very philosophically deep if you think about it. You know, the war was so traumatic that, you know, made the German character what it is today.
The Habsburgs were doing too well, and under the leadership of their Cardinal Richelieu, one of the craftiest statesmen in history, joined into the conflict. Based out of Belgium, which was a colony of theirs, the Spanish...
What if Alt Hist has this weird idea that he talked about in other videos of the Swedish conquering all of Germany and not just assimilating into Germany? Sounds pretty weird.
Nearly seizing Paris before being turned back.
Spanish Empire.
The war kind of ran out of steam since none of the participants really had functioning societies
Empire,
anymore.
I guess.
Spain and France had collapsed into civil wars, Italy was in rebellion, Sweden had just run out of guys, and the Netherlands in their classic Dutch way had somehow made a massive profit off the war. The Treaty of Westphalia that came at the end of 30 years of war
That's a very Dutch
one
thing
of the
to do,
turning
though.
points in European history, since everyone sat down to prevent another war like this.
The
from
Dutch are
ever
always
happening
swimming
again.
in money, bro.
A complex balance of power developed, and Europe settled into 150 years of social stability, relative peace, and humanity called the l'Ancien Régime. Similarly, the 30 Years' War left a bad taste in everyone's mouth when it came to religious war and religious fanaticism, which set Western civilization up for the Enlightenment and secularism in general. Well, those were my 12 wars. What did you think? What war...
Ooh. I probably won't be here long, though. I'm going to a thrift store to get clothes for a school play. Well, maybe to prom, too. I don't know. Lamau. Well, good luck in your shopping, man. Hopefully you get something nice for prom, too. The Treaty of Westphalia is when the modern state's born. That is defined by borders, not by the relationships between nobles. True. Very interesting, too. So what do you guys thought about all these wars? I thought that was amazing. So we got 3 in Europe, 2 in the Middle East, 2 of India, 2 in China, 1 in Korea, 1 in Africa, and 1 in the Americas. It sounds pretty neat, I would say. That was pretty good, though. Could you react to Kings and Generals, Alaric, and the Goths, please? Sure, man. Is it this one? Okay, man. You tell me if this is the one. Oh.
In late August of the year 410, a Visigothic king, Alaric, conquered and sacked the city of Rome. This was the first time in 800 years that the Eternal City had been...
No, China has some crazy conflicts. Not just Europe. Pretty cool. Yeah, a pretty diverse list. I really enjoyed the list of the wars. You know, we had a pretty diverse when it came to history. So
taken by an enemy.
Pretty nice.
And it came as a shock to the Romans, their friends, and their enemies alike.
The Romans
Most
having
histories
problems
focus on
with
the Roman Empire itself,
their
and only
bordering
speak of the
tribes.
Goths as an invasive force to that civilization. But they have a long and exciting history of their own. From their beginnings in the cold northlands of Scandinavia to ruling a significant portion of post-Roman Europe, the story of the Eastern Germanic Goths is one that must be told. How did they emerge and become so powerful that they were able to take Rome? Welcome to our video on the history of the Goths in the era of late antiquity. With sedentary work like ours, it's often
pretty interesting, because the Goths would eventually be one of the most, one of the biggest problems for Rome, if not the biggest. You know, the Huns were also, I think, pretty big.
To maintain good habits. But thankfully, the sponsor of this video, the app called Fabulous, is here
Sponsor
to help
time.
with this.
You obviously go support the original channel, you know, the content creator. I'll leave the links in the description if you're watching this on YouTube on a later time. But right now we can skip it, yeah. Oh.
Off a Fabulous subscription.
Should I leave out and respect
the Gothic tribes is still up for debate, but it is widely believed that they first came from the Gotland region in the south of modern-day Sweden.
Makes sense.
Whether because of overpopulation, natural disasters, or resource shortages, various Germanic tribes, including the Goths, gradually began migrating south into modern-day Eastern Europe. Rome had its first terrifying encounter with the Germans during the Imgen War, when groups of Teutones, Ambrones, and Cimbri from modern-day Denmark invaded Italy. The Goths, however, migrated further east at first, and did not immediately interact with the empire to the south. Yeah. They had a bilateral family structure based on intermarriage and gift-giving, and these gifts from tribal leaders to other tribal contingents
I love the graphics,
would be repaid by allegiance to the gift-giver. These customs began to extend familial relationships to slowly bring larger Gothic groups together. Later, when their military conflicts against Rome occurred, these informal and temporary large groups would gel together on a more permanent basis, one of the reasons the Goths became so powerful as to rival the empire. The Goths first
I feel everyone has heard of the Goths, but no one actually knows anything about them. I kind of feel like that. I know a little bit of the Goths, but not a lot, to be honest. That first invasion was stopped by Roman general Marius by the way, one of Rome's first military dictators. Wow, very interesting fact,
attack on the empire took place during the crisis of the 3rd century in the year 238, when they sacked Histria on the Black Sea coast. They were only repelled by a substantial subsidy from the emperor. This did not end the problem.
Yeah,
from 249 to 268, there were constant high-intensity Gothic raids over land and sea into the Black Sea region, the Balkans, Thrace, Asia Minor, and Greece, which continued until twin Roman...
I know almost nothing about ancient history, though. Yeah, same. Ancient history is one of my weakest part of history, you know.
Victories in 268 near Greece and 270 at Nisus.
So hey, great, we're about to literally learn together.
The reasons for these initial attacks are debated
we're all taking
but it is
this
probable
class
that the
in
internal
ancient history.
Instability of the empire during the 200s played a key part. As civil war rocked the Roman world, the Goths would likely have seen the opportunity to take advantage and began to raid the vulnerable empire for plunder. A cycle would emerge, whereby internal revolt would inspire barbarian attacks, and when the emperor went to deal with the barbarians, more internal revolt would occur. Though the Goths first appeared as raiders, they could not present a clear existential threat to the empire. So how did they eventually sack the Eternal City?
And that's the thing, right? A lot of, they are threats because they are raiding cities that border the empire, right? But they are not huge threats that they are going to take over, right? So that's why I guess they give them money. I don't know, maybe.
Tribes to the Roman Empire, and especially its military, began to have a profound impact on the increasing strength of barbarian invaders. Many Goths who served in the Roman army became entirely acclimatized to a Roman way of life, some of which would then return home, bringing Roman habits, ways of training, organization, and money along with them. As the 3rd century turned into the 4th, Gothic interconnectedness with the Roman Empire became ever greater, along with bouts of violence which would occasionally flare up between the two factions. Roman emperors increasingly adopted policies designed to cut down barbarian strength before it materialized by launching punitive raids into their territory.
Punitive raids.
This gave the barbarian Gothic leaders further east every incentive to become more competent militarily in order to defend.
If you think about it, those punitive raids made the problem bigger, right? Instead of pouring water to the fire, you poured gasoline into the fire. That's what they really did. Because now the Goths are trying to learn how to repel those punitive raids and therefore making themselves stronger, better combatants. Probably not a very smart decision to punish them with raids. I've been watching a lot of videos on ancient history lately. A very interesting time in human history. Indeed, man. Truly, truly, truly.
And their families and homes.
Oh, what was that? Indeed.
Divide and conquer strategies resulted in the subsidizing of some Gothic kings, which built up their royal prestige and governing capacity.
Yeah, not
some
very
evidence
smart.
exists to suggest that the Tetrarchy of Diocletian
part of the
supported and
Romans.
approved of building Thuringian Gothic strength and territorial gains at the mouth of the Danube, at the expense of other barbarian groups in the area, such as the Carpi. This was perhaps because the Goths were viewed as reliable and could function as another layer of imperial defense on the turbulent Danubian border. However, raising the status of these barbarian leaders above others provided them with the strength for military action against their Roman benefactors, something which otherwise could not be accomplished. In these ways, Rome's attitude.
Counter argument: if you don't do punitive campaigns, then the raiding Roman Empire becomes risk-free and it's probably done a lot more. Let me see. What's my opinion on that? I think, well, I think in a way you're right. I think you're right. It's just very complicated.
Actions towards the barbarians only made them stronger and more.
I guess
like
both
themselves.
actions bring their
The
consequences
result of
to
this
it,
is
right?
shown in 320, when the Thuringi re-emerge in the sources far more powerfully than before. Likely because of their imperial sponsorship, the Thuringi became the undisputed masters of the lower Danube and the abandoned Roman province of Dacia.
That's nice.
These more powerful Thuringi Goths were then attacked by an alarmed Constantine in the 320s and 330s, fearing the increase of their power. Likely beginning gradually.
You raid
in the
us, we
350s,
raid you back,
a chain
my
of
guy.
events would come to pass, which would result in the beginning of the end for Rome. In the east, a new powerful force began to emerge, the nomadic Huns. What happened is
The Huns,
debated, but it seems like the Hunnic threat drove unstoppably but gradually west, first defeating and subjugating the Alans, who together then defeated the powerful Grotthungi Gothic king, Alaric, in the mid-370s. It is widely speculated that the Grotthungi Goths who stayed behind and became Hunnic subjects were the future Ostrogoths, while the Gothic refugees, mainly Thuringi but some Grotthungi, would come together as the Visigoths. Following this disaster, a massive contingent of Gothic refugees then streamed west towards the Danube border, hoping to escape their pursuers. Their leader, a Visigoth Thuringi Goth named Fritigern, petitioned to be allowed peacefully into the empire.
And
the Romans accepted, but corrupt officials abused the Goths militarily, and by limiting their food supplies, caused unrest among the new arrivals. After being invited to a banquet by a Roman governor, Fritigern was betrayed by his hosts, but managed to escape and decided to revolt against this appalling treatment. Barbarian units in the Thracian army joined him, as well as Gothic slaves in the province.
now imagine that, you know, you revolt, but you're inside the empire now, so tough situation for sure. Counter argument: you don't need to raid in revenge, rather just fortify for the next and try to get some captives. Yeah, smart counter argument. The best one could probably do its conquer right up the natural border, then set up puppet regimes across the borders to act as a meat shields for incoming barbarians. Yeah, kind of like Soviet style, right?
This is where the rebellion was strongest. In August 378, Fritigern's Gothic army obliterated Valens and his legions.
I'm really
at the
struggling
Battle
with
of
my
Adrianople,
English. Maybe it's because I
and
haven't
two-thirds
practiced.
of the Eastern Field Army was
But I find
killed.
it particularly
In
hard
the
right now.
aftermath,
I don't know why.
manpower shortages would ensure that the reliance on barbarian, prominently Gothic soldiers would continue until the end of the empire. When Theodosius I became emperor in 379 after the death of Valens, the manpower situation for the Romans was critical. The new emperor needed victories against the Goths after Adrianople, and he began to slowly clear Thrace and other Roman territories of the invaders, driving them away from Constantinople and into Illyricum. Participating in this campaign was a general called Modares, who was himself a Goth in imperial service, which shows the potentially high levels a barbarian could reach within the imperial structure even in the late 300s. Despite these successes, continued Gothic pressure eventually forced Theodosius to give up his attempts, and Gothic contingents were allowed to settle in Thrace and the Balkans, becoming
So like
sedentary
modern
as the
day
Romans
Bulgaria.
were, and increasingly joining the Roman military in the decades afterwards. Also increasing were the amount of Gothic nobility becoming officers and generals in the Roman
Yeah, so
army.
at least other barbarians, right, quote unquote barbarians, could join the army, become nobility. Pretty interesting. Not a lot. You don't see that a lot in some empires. Not all, but some. It must be a pain for the Romans, Saxons, Franks, Vandals, and others on the Rhine, Goths, Huns, and others on the Danube frontier. It can't be anywhere at once to fight. That's true. You know, Roman military being everywhere.
Including the aforementioned
All borders
Modares.
of the Roman Empire were pretty
Two
crazy
other
if you think about
barbarian
it.
nobles who became imperial commanders were Frevita and Eriulf, the latter of which was killed in a drunken brawl by the former.
Brawl.
He had an
Oh, God.
illustrious career after this incident, married a Roman bride, and crushed a mutiny led by Gainas, another Gothic general. All of these men illustrate a sudden influx of skillful and important Gothic leaders into the imperial hierarchy. A far more significant figure, however, was Alaric. The origin of Alaric is shrouded in mystery, but the first notable event of his life seems to be the Battle of the Frigidos River in 394, between the Eastern Emperor Theodosius I and the usurper Eugenius. The battle was unusually bloody for all combatants, but the Gothic and other barbarian
Oh, yeah, man. Sorry about that. I just had a couple of weeks when I couldn't record because I was sick with COVID and had a couple other things going on. But it's gonna come out soon. I promise. I promise. I promise.
units under Alaric suffered massive losses after they were
But
placed
I'm-
in the front
I'm still dealing
ranks
with the cough
so
and
that
all
they
that.
would absorb most of the damage. It is not known, but it is possible that Theodosius purposefully did this so that after the battle, the Goths would be diminished compared to the rest of his army. In 395, Alaric grew angry at the lack of imperial generosity which followed the victory at Frigidos, a victory which he believed he won for Theodosius. When en route to the Balkans, Alaric revolted in the same manner
man.
as Fritigern, and was increasingly joined by more Gothic settlers and units who saw the rebellion as a way to better their conditions. Being unable to attack Constantinople, Alaric's army raided easier targets in Macedon and Greece until he was given a position of command, possibly Magister Militum of the province of Illyricum. Western regent Stilicho, who was also a barbarian of Gothic origin, had come to deal with Alaric, but the Eastern Roman court was hostile to the Western one at
I
this
didn't
time,
actually know that
and
more.
gave
Fun
Alaric
fact, the Goths
position
were the
to
first
weaken Stilicho.
Germanic tribes to convert to
Late in
Christianity
401,
around
however,
380.
Alaric,
Huh.
no longer regarding
Very
the
interesting
Eastern
fact, I didn't
Empire
know
as
that.
a reliable negotiating partner,
The first
invaded
Germanic
Italy
tribes
over
to
the
convert
Julian
to
Alps. He
Christianity.
didn't
Nice.
succeed on this attempt, as Stilicho returned and halted the advance after winning a few small battles, so Alaric retreated back into the Balkans.
Back again to the
In
Balkans.
405, wanting to placate the still dangerous Alaric, the Empire gave him the position of Magister Militum again. Again in 407, Alaric attacked Italy.
Bro, imagine that relationship, fighting each other and then giving him military titles.
Wanting greater
Very
plunder
interesting
in fresh
relationship.
lands, demanding 4,000 pounds of gold to dissuade him, which Stilicho gave. The Roman aristocracy,
Alright, I mean,
who had to bear a part of the
sounds
cost
like a good
for
deal
paying
to
this
me.
bribe, were dissatisfied and convinced
Look
Western
at those
Emperor
river
Honorius
borders.
to kill Stilicho and the families of thousands of his Gothic auxiliaries, whose men...
I don't know. I find those borders kind of satisfying, you know? I don't know why. But I think that's the word, satisfying.
...joined Alaric. After marching directly
Just a very
down the
natural
Italian peninsula
border.
to Rome,
The problem
where
is that
Gothic
rivers
slaves
change
swelled his
through
forces,
time, right? So
Alaric besieged the Eternal City during the winter of 408 and 409. Over the next 2 years, negotiations between the Goths and Romans broke down, and in August of 410, Alaric's Goths sacked the city for the first time since Brennus had in 390 BC. They stripped Rome of centuries worth of wealth, but for Alaric
Centuries
this was a
worth,
failure
holy
rather than a
shit.
victory. Everything he and other Gothic leaders had fought for were up in flames. Imperial office for himself and a legitimate place for his people inside the prosperous
empire.
civilized
Yeah.
empire were both now out of reach.
yeah,
and
yeah,
he
yeah.
would
Yeah, maybe it's really not a victory because everything you fought for, all the rights, all the places that you could get inside the empire are now gone because now you fucking burned the city though. Probably not very smart. Maybe it's gonna come back to bite them. I don't know. It's only 49 minutes. Yeah, man, it's not about time. It's that I really just couldn't record for like 2 weeks because I was sick. But it's really not about time or anything like that. True, but Christianity they converted was Alarianism, which was seen as heretical because it was not Roman Catholic, while the Franks did convert to Catholicism. There was some great border war at the times. Very interesting.
never be given Rome by right. This monumental sacking of Rome did not last Alaric long, as before 410 was over, Alaric passed away. In the next century, the Goths were no longer the products and victims of Roman history, and they now made Rome's history themselves. The western branch of the Goths, the Visigoths,
yeah.
eventually settled in Hispania and forged a kingdom for themselves there, eventually falling to the invading Umayyad Caliphate in the early 700s. Meanwhile, the Ostrogoths, who had been freed from Hunnic dominion after their defeat at the Battle of Nidau in 454, eventually established the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy under Theodoric the Great, which fell to the remnant of the Roman Empire under Justinian in the mid-500s. The reputation of the Goths in popular
So Goths divided in two between the Visigoths, who settled in France and Spain, and the Ostrogoths, who settled in Italy and some parts of like Croatia, Slovenia. It's good to know, like I said, like you guys said, not a lot of people know much about the Goths, including myself.
Of the Eternal City. But as shown in this video, they were far more complex. They reacted to Roman violence with violence of their own, eventually learning from their settled counterparts and eventually succeeding them. In contrast to the savage reputation of their name, the Gothic leaders Alaric and Fritigern seemed to genuinely care about the fate of their people, whereas the Romans during this time treated the Goths and other barbarians in a repulsive manner. But neither Rome nor the Goths were good or evil, and all were reacting to the situations in which they were placed.
It's never black and white, it's always gray.
A phenomenon which led the Goths from small tribal bands to rulers of great kingdoms. More videos on Germanic and Roman history are on the way, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed.
Very nice. Go subscribe to the original creator. I really enjoyed that piece of content. We already watched this. I think I saw a video that I liked. It's from JJ McCloud. I don't know how to pronounce that. But it's this one. What country has the least bad history? What do you guys think? Would you guys be interested in this video? We can watch one of these two. I don't know. Let's watch this one though.
This video was brought to you by Ground News. Hello friends, my name is JJ. So a while ago, the head of the Conservative Party of Canada, Erin O'Toole, gave a speech in which he attempted to defend his country's reputation from charges that its history had just been one long slog of genocide and racism. It was a charge that had been steadily gaining traction in recent years, thanks to increased awareness of Canada's historic mistreatment of the Native Canadians.
I've heard a lot about this, but I'm not well too informed about this.
But there had also been growing pushback against this narrative, mostly from the political right, who argued that Canada's history didn't actually look that bad, so long as you viewed it from the proper perspective. And it was in that context that Erin O'Toole said this.
We are not a perfect country.
Oh, I thought he was gonna say we're not Germany or something like that.
No country is.
Least bad history is probably the one where people arrive the latest. Probably. Tough question. Iceland has relatively little history with relatively little war.
There is not a place on this planet whose history can withstand close scrutiny.
Now, people say this sort of thing all the time, but is it actually true? Does every single country in the entire world actually have a bunch of stuff in their history that's shameful and upsetting? I figured it
This is a really good question, though. I really don't know.
might be worthwhile to take a look. So, when it comes to the question of whether a country has a deep historic shame, there are obviously a lot of places that we can give a hard yes to right off the bat. We could start with
Japan.
any country that was historically involved in the practice of global conquest and empire building, either as an imperial power that
Spanish
went around
Empire.
the world taking over
Spanish
other
Empire.
places, or as a so-called settler society set up by an imperial power that then more or less proceeded to continue the imperialist powers' imperialist policies. Countries of this sort routinely engaged in campaigns of genocide against the indigenous peoples of the lands they conquered and occupied. And more often than not, were also involved in the global trade and use of African slaves, which was one of mankind's uniquely monstrous atrocities and a prominent feature of the supposed golden age of imperialism. Most of the major powers of Europe are guilty of this category of
France,
historic sin,
England,
including Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Holland, Denmark, and Belgium.
Wow, even
as
Denmark.
Well as the major
Which we usually think about Denmark as a really peaceful place, but they did do some colonization, if I'm not mistaken. Iceland had slaves, though. Holy crap. What about the French versus the English Canada? We could watch that, too. I don't know if I have already watched that. It sounds like I have.
Settler nations of the New World like America, Canada, Australia, Mexico, Argentina, and
Mexico! What the hell? Yeah, I guess he's kind of right, though. Mexico did have wars with the natives, and I'm not entirely sure if we did some atrocities, but yeah, mistreatment. All right, it makes sense, though. Brazil, same thing. Argentina, particularly. US, Canada, Australia. Well, I guess the natives in Australia. Yeah, it makes sense.
All right,
though.
now in the second category of historic
Well, we have
sin,
other
you could
bad
put
times,
any country
too.
that spent any
Not
of its
Germany
recent
now.
history as
Yeah, he hasn't mentioned Germany, which we were. I don't know. I just
brutal dictatorship. Dictatorship is
again not mentioning Germany. I mean, we usually think about Germany and that time in history where Germany did some bad stuff, but
by unrestrained force and violence, and usually entails physical brutality and the suppression of basic.
Oh, maybe he's gonna
human
include
freedoms
Germany
and
in this
civil
one.
rights on a vast scale,
And
including
Japan.
torture and arbitrary execution. Most of the world's largest countries experienced periods of truly vicious dictatorship in the last 100 years, including Russia, China, Pakistan, and Indonesia, as well as most countries in the Middle East,
Indonesia.
Latin and South
That's-
America, and Africa. This
Yeah.
category would also include all the countries that embraced fascism around the time
Oh,
of the
there
Second
we
World
go.
War, like Germany and Japan, as well as the 20th century communist
he didn't mention Italy though. Maybe he forgot or Mexican Revolution, persecution of the Chinese. Oh, okay, that's true. That's true. JJ's milk toast of plainlist of society. Video people so ambivalent to him. The ones he did about the foods, crust, and cultures are nice though. I honestly don't know much about him, so I can't really have a huge opinion on him. It's funny how we knock on Germany and they're ashamed, and the Mongols completely own it. That's true. That's something weird, isn't it? I never met someone from Mongolia, but I would feel really strange if like they owned their imperial past. You know, it'd be weird. Kind of like if you met a German and they felt proud about their past. You know, it'd be super weird. Did the Irish ever do anything controversial? I don't. They did had a civil war, didn't they? That was pretty brutal. Like Irish fighting. I don't know if it was about religion, but the Irish, I think, had a civil war.
Everywhere from Poland,
I don't know if that's
to Cuba to Vietnam. It's not much of a stretch
extremely
to say
brutal.
that dictatorship, in whatever form, was the single greatest cause
Yeah,
of preventable
Russia,
human
Soviet
suffering and
Union,
death in the last century.
Vietnam.
So anyway, as you can see, the sins of imperialism.
So we have Mongolia. Mongolia there is gone. He didn't blur North Korea, which is interesting. He didn't blur Vietnam as well. Germany, Italy, okay. The Americas are gone, bro. Other than Jamaica. I think that's Jamaica right there. So, hey, not that bad, I guess.
Dictatorship alone are probably common enough.
True, they had
create,
their troubles, yeah.
90% of the modern world,
I guess
which
every
makes
country
the
did
overall
have
thesis
its
about
troubles,
how
though.
every country has a shameful past, pretty close to being universally true. But now, let us look at a couple of countries that are not so easily classified.
Oh, here we go.
There's a popular stereotype that the nations of Scandinavia are a uniquely sinless part.
Yeah, but how do you classify Scandinavia when it comes to the Vikings? They did have a lot of brutal raids. The Vikings were particularly brutal, so is he going to mention that? Or that's like too old, like too ancient
The
to
almost
classify.
nearly perfect people, as one author playfully described them. But the people who actually live in these places are usually a little bit more clear-eyed about themselves, including the upsetting but often not well-known chapters of their history. So here's a trick. If you ever want to find an easy way to figure out what a country is ashamed of, just look up what their leaders have issued an official apology.
I made it. Get us. Hello, bro. Sorry about all the delays. It's been rough, man. But thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Switzerland has made a pretty clean history. They have been neutral for 200 years. I heard Sweden treated Sami people bad.
G4. The governments of Sweden, Norway, and Finland, for instance, have all in recent years issued apologies of various sorts for their historic mistreatment of the northern-dwelling Sami people.
Oh, bro. You're a fucking psychic, bro. Yeah, you were right. The Sami people treatment was pretty bad, apparently. I didn't knew that. Maybe Finland, their participation in the SS was in revenge for the Winter War. That's true. Yeah, they wanted protection against the Soviets. I heard they're trying so hard to assimilate them into Swedish culture. Is that so bad, though? I don't know. I feel kind of, well...
The Sami are often described as the only indigenous peoples in Europe, and much like the indigenous peoples of the New World, were subject to displacement from their traditional lands.
It's okay, your delays helped me since I couldn't get here until now.
And emotionally abusive assimilation initiatives that
every country has done at least
century,
something bad. I think I agree with that.
Cultural genocide. All of the Scandinavian countries likewise have shames related to the Second World War in some way. Norway had a viciously pro-Nazi government that exported hundreds of Jews to death camps. The Finns had a military alliance with the Nazis as part of an anti-Russian alliance and have thus been implicated in some Nazi war crimes. And while Sweden stayed neutral in the year 2000, the Swedish government admitted that in retrospect, staying neutral in...
Yeah, and this is, you know, here comes the argument against Switzerland. I think they did refuse like Jewish immigrants or Jewish refugees, which is kind of, yeah, now when you look back at it, that's pretty bad. Also, the Nazi gold, that's also a huge thing on Switzerland. They did handle a lot of Nazi gold. That's also kind of bad. I don't know.
In a war between fascism and democracy was morally wrong. The government of Switzerland, which is another place I think many people
he's gonna get to the gold, the Nazi gold.
Innocent, has also apologized on multiple occasions for the degree that its wartime neutrality allowed it to engage in morally abhorrent activities, including the laundering of Nazi gold and the turning away of over 25,000 Jewish
25,000.
The tiny nation of Iceland similarly deported most of its Jews during the war and refused to accept Jewish refugees as well. The same was true of other tiny European countries like Luxembourg
Liechtenstein.
which basically gets
Little
us to one of
Liechtenstein.
the other most common themes of historic shames: violent hatred or cruel indifference to people within your own borders.
Turkey?
If a country wasn't a dictatorship or an imperial power, chances are high it at least went through some modern phase of
Rwanda, though, the
violence
Rwandan
against
genocide.
itself. Ireland, for instance, had a civil war in the early 20th century that began as a war of independence from Great Britain, but soon evolved into a war pitting Irishmen against Irishmen, which then continued until the 1990s in the north. India went through a similar situation following its independence
that's
from Britain
true,
in
though.
1947, which saw terrible violence between Hindus
Between Hindus, Muslims, it was pretty rough.
and Muslims as part of the partition project to cleanly divide the
This one was pretty
Muslim
bad
state
too.
of Pakistan from predominantly Hindu India. Now, many Indians and Irish would doubtless
Will you do oversimplified? Yeah, after this one, we'll do an oversimplified.
argue that none of this violence would have occurred if not for the ways that the British mismanaged their colonial societies. But still, there does come a point at which the guilt of those who directly committed the killings starts to overshadow that of those who merely created the context. In any case, both of these countries' governments do often make a show of feeling shame and remorse about these unquestionably
Remembrance Day.
grim periods of their history.
In India.
Now having worked through these special cases, let me now tell you what part of the world I think might be able to make the strongest claim about having a relatively shameless history, even though the argument is
Oh
kind of
boy, here we
complicated.
go.
But before
Here
that,
we go,
let us now
guys.
hear a word from the sponsor of today's video, Ground News. So as you know, we are living in a
Sponsor
time in which there is a
time.
truly epic abundance of news.
Swedes made Nestle. That's bad enough. That's kind of true, though. The only thing I agree with Gandhi was for the British Raj being united.
News everywhere, and news coming at
There's a
you
lot of
from more
controversials
publications,
behind,
networks, and
Gandhi.
websites than ever before in the history of man. So if you're trying to navigate this brave new world without some sort of news aggregator app, I don't know what you're doing. May I suggest today's video sponsor, Ground News. Ground News provides you with a comprehensive, well-organized news-consuming experience, bringing you headlines and links on subjects you're interested in from over 50,000 outlets from around the world and across the political spectrum. But what really makes them stand out is this little thing at the bottom that tells you the degree to which a story is playing more in.
That sounds actually pretty interesting. You know, the liberal conservative thing. I don't know how accurate that would be, but it sounds like an interesting idea. Do you want to watch feature history or I'll wait for the binge stream? That's going to be my next binge stream, so definitely wait for that one. I'm going to binge watch some other videos. I already have some videos in mind. My maternal great-great-grandfather was Irish and fought in the Irish Civil War. Wow. He was a former British soldier who served in World War I in France. Damn, bro, that's an amazing family story. Pretty cool, man. I personally don't like Gandhi, not looking at him from a pro-colonialist perspective. I used it, it's pretty good.
Click the
Yeah,
link on the
there's
thing
some good
below
videos
and
on
get
Gandhi.
started
I probably
today.
should watch
Ground
some of
News.
those.
Be informed, clearly. All right, so my pick for the countries with
Oh,
the
here we
least
go.
controversial history is the English-speaking Caribbean. Now, on the one hand, the Anglo-Caribbean
alright.
countries are very obviously products of a horrible history.
I didn't thought he was gonna say that. I thought he was gonna say, I don't know, Thailand or something. Thailand did join the Japanese Empire though, so I don't know.
Of colonization and indigenous displacement and genocide, just as the rest of the New World is. In fact, the removal of the indigenous population of the so-called
But
West
how good is this though? Because much of the British Caribbean had a lot of slavery, so how does that work? I don't know.
Indies is probably among the most bleakly successful of any such effort in history, given how astronomically low the surviving indigenous population.
Most of these countries were
places is today.
plantations,
Thoroughly deprived
so-
of their original inhabitants during the 17th and 18th centuries, the islands of the English Caribbean were transformed into equally extreme examples of slave colonies, whose character became almost entirely defined.
What's up with
by
that, man? I think that's bad
zealous
enough.
Import and use of African slave labor, which is why these countries all have black majority populations.
75% black. Wow.
There is clearly a lot of depressing stuff in the history of the Anglo-Caribbean, but because these countries are now mostly run by the descendants of the slaves and not the...
What about the Pacific Islands? True, though, other than maybe Fiji, you know, I think Fiji has had some conflict with its native and Indian population, but I think a lot of the Pacific Islands probably have peaceful histories. Hey, man, how are you doing? Doing great, bro. Thanks for asking. Much, much better. Still dealing with a little bit of the COVID symptoms, but much, much better. Post-independence, it's probably what he's talking about. Oh, true, though. I don't get this. The Caribbean was a big slave plantation, way worse than Ireland and Switzerland. I don't get it either.
The lines of historic responsibility
I don't get it either.
Blurred in a unique way. It would be strange for the government of, say, Barbados to feel shame about the slave trade, for instance, when basically every senior person in their government, from the president on down, is themselves a descendant of slaves. Instead, these places usually argue that...
all right, that makes sense, though. If your country's majority black, then it's not up to you, but...
Of their country's historic shames are really just the shames of Europe, and something that Europe should be more remorseful about.
I could see it. I could see
their
it.
conscience is clear. The Anglo-Caribbean countries also have no record of dictatorship, which is something that distinguishes them from the other countries.
Makes sense, I guess, yeah.
Cuba and Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which very much did. Since gaining independence from Great Britain in the 1960s, tiny Grenada is the only English Caribbean country to have ever seen a democratically elected government overthrown, and even then, only briefly.
I don't like JJ from a personal stand. A lot of people seem to not like him. What was he done, man? Listen, if he has done or said some atrocious stuff, I'm sorry, but I have watched like 3-4 videos about him, so I apologize.
So
I haven't watched most of his
looking
videos.
Up their official apologies. In 2017, the Prime Minister of Jamaica officially apologized for something he described as a chapter in our national life that was characterized by brutality, injustice, and repression. He was referring to the mistreatment of the Rastafarians, who, as you may know, are an eccentric religious sect in that part of the world. Their beliefs and practices, including their famous pot use, always made them unpopular with Jamaica's Christian majority. Even post-independence,
makes a lot of sense.
Often on the receiving end of discrimination, harassment, and even violence by state authorities who stereotyped them as criminals and troublemakers. The 1960s was a period of particular tension and violence between Rastas and state authorities, and that was the dark chapter that the Prime Minister was specifically apologizing for. There are Rasta communities in other Anglo-Caribbean countries as well who have faced similar mistreatment, and in recent years, the governments of those countries have...
Yo, that actually makes a lot of sense, though. JJ on Latunji.
Issued official
my boy
apologies
JJ.
Likewise,
KSI. I used to watch a lot of KSI's videos. Haven't watched him lately.
Arab, white and mixed race peoples, and there has occasionally been tension between these groups and the black
and this is something that happened in Fiji. You know, some tension between the Indian population and I guess the native people from Fiji.
As well as tensions born from divisions of color and culture,
religion,
and especially sexual diversity within the black community itself. But by the standards of much of the world, these tensions have been incredibly mild, and I don't think that these places are necessarily wrong to be proud about this fact. Which in turn begs one of the most controversial questions about this whole shameful history issue. Even if we accept that all countries have some shames in their past, is it possible to rank some shames as...
Oh, yeah, I heard about this. He had made a video about Quebecers, and I don't agree with his stance. I think we watched that video. Maybe it's up. I don't know. I'll have to double check. I'm Quebecois. Oh.
Being objectively worse than others? Is Germany's Nazi history worse than the history of Mao Zedong's rule in China? Is Mao Zedong's rule worse than Brazilian slavery? Is the discrimination faced by the Jews of Iceland as bad as that of the Rastafarians in Antigua? And how far back are you supposed to go when assessing history? The Greek dictatorship...
That's true, though. We were talking about the Vikings and how far should you go? Should you count the Vikings as a part of a country's history when it comes to atrocities.
The 1970s might
Gosh,
not
I'm
be as
struggling with
bad
my
in
English
terms
today.
of
Like,
body
COVID made
count
me
as the Chilean
so fucking
dictatorship
stupid.
of Augusto Pinochet,
Oh,
but
Pinochet.
Alexander the Great
Oh,
was
shit.
unquestionably worse than him, so how should that factor into our rankings? There is also the tricky question of how widely
I also have
shared
mixed feelings
remorse
about
for a
JJ.
nation's shameful history should be. For
Hello,
example,
my
here
man.
in
How are you
Canada,
doing,
we could
Juan?
make the case
Hope
that
you're having a
pretty
good
much
day, my
everyone
man.
should
Thank you for
feel at
being
least
here.
some guilt for the displacement of the native Canadians, given we're still all living on their land. But if you take the bloody regime of, say, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, it can be harder to measure how broadly the responsibility for his dictatorship deserves to
And
be
that's the
shared
thing
by
also. A lot of people from Mongolia feel very proud about the Mongol Empire. Should they feel shame about their history? It's a really tough
Iraqi
question.
society as a whole. These sorts of questions matter because we do need moral leaders in this world, and these days we tend to have rather high expectations of what it means to be credible on this front. We accordingly might find it useful to identify countries that have committed fewer historical crimes than others because they might be the most credibly equipped to give advice to the rest of us. On the other hand, accepting the premise that every country has a history that can't survive close scrutiny, as O'Toole said, might also be one of the best ways to create a genuinely harmonious world order, free of grudges and excessive judgment, even if it is not based on a literal truth. Just because it does at least gesture in the direction of a larger truth, which is the idea that human nature is human nature regardless of nationality, and that we all possess the same inherent capacity for evil, and are thus all equally obligated to work hard to avoid the sort of dark impulses that have inflicted so much misery on our shared human past. But I would be curious to hear
Well,
what
that's
you think. Do you buy
that's a pretty nice conclusion to the video. The First Minister of Scotland apologized the other day, about the killing of women accused of being witches in the 1600s. That's interesting. And the early 1700s. A lot of people are laughing at her. Oh, well, I feel bad that people are laughing at her. It's kind of a not so common thing to say, but I guess official apologies should be taken at least partially seriously, you know? It's true we don't see anyone mourn about the Black Death. That's true. You too, brother. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. No, I don't think they should be ashamed. You know, very respectable. I think they should, since most Scandinavian countries existed during the time, like Denmark. Not that I think they should be ashamed of it. Yeah, that's true. Like, I don't think you can shame a country for their history, especially their very ancient history, though. But we should be aware, you know, we should talk about it, and be mindful about people's history. All right, so oversimplified. It's been a while, and this video is gonna get monetized because of it. But which one should we watch? Which ones haven't? I think let's watch The War That Changed the English Language, shall we? Henry VIII. Okay, well, yeah, it's your call. Let's watch Henry VIII.
This video was
I don't know much about. Sorry about my voice, though. Like, you know, COVID. It's pretty rough.
made possible by Honey. Keep watching to find out how you can save money when you shop online. Also, the reviews are in. That's some nice merch. Get your brand new character pin, limited time favor.
I don't know much about Henry VIII other than the separation of England from the church, and of course some of the wife, you know, kind of killings.
Face mask and more. Link down below. Sigmund, I don't have much longer. Tell me, was I a good king? You were okay. Will I be remembered as the great warrior king who invaded France, revolutionized English healthcare, and developed great parklands? Probably not, because of the wife killings. Because of the wife
killings, of course. No.
Sigmund, how did I get here?
It's not
I still
funny
remember
though.
the good old days when I was a boy with a heart full of fire, and Mummy would teach me. Okay, Henry.
I only
this
know he
is a
had
horse.
only
Can you
one
say
son
horse?
and 2 daughters.
Divorce. What? No. Okay, let's try this one. Can you say loaf of bread. Loaf with her head. No, Henry, that's wrong. You know what? Last one. Okay. Can you
Look
say
at that. Look at the details on the background, though. There are what looks like dolls right here at the corner, and they have no heads. Attention to detail, I guess.
Yes, that's it. I'm the supreme head of the church. Screw the Pope. You know what? You're my son and I love you, but you're freaking weird, man. The year is 1491. England has just come out of 3 decades of civil war, in which a bunch
War
of
of the
Henrys,
Roses?
Edwards,
Yeah.
and one Richard had a little ding-dong over which royal house should rule the realm. Finally, a Henry won, Henry VII, and he had a son. What should we name him? My royal lineage is full of Henrys. A fine name, a vigorous name, a tenacious name,
A vigorous
a muscular name. How about Arthur? And so Arthur, Prince of Wales and next in line to the throne, was born. 5 years later, Prince Henry was born, but nobody cares about him. He's not the heir, just a spare. The king wanted to make an alliance with Spain, so one day he said to his son Arthur, "Hey, baby, you see that lady baby? That's gonna be your wife." But
Catherine of
I'm not
Aragon?
3
Okay,
years old.
okay.
Listen, there's something you have to understand. You're my son. But more than that, you're a political bargaining tool. But you love me, right? I love you as a political bargaining tool. Yay. Hey, Pop, who the heck are you? I've written you a poem. Listen here, tiny
Okay,
man.
let's read the poem. I love you, Dad. You are so pleasant. I'm so glad I'm not a peasant. That's a really nice poem. I like that. Let me just change. Well, no, I was gonna change the title, but whatever, man.
Do you see that I'm busy? But I'm your son. I have another son? As Arthur was in another palace, being prepped to become
Can I
king,
play
Henry lived
Fortnite
with
now?
his mother and 2 sisters at Eltham, where he was being trained for a church career. And not just that, Henry learnt languages. He played sports.
Very
He learnt
interesting.
The recorder. What a nerd. Am I right? Wrong. Henry was the coolest kid around.
Oh, wow.
So I told my Latin teacher he could kissius my buddius. Anyway, here's Wonderwall. Great scholars and theologians from across Europe came to meet and teach the young Prince Henry, who by all accounts was a very enlightened, bright, and charming young boy. Everybody loved Henry.
Considering the context, I say it's very interesting that he was being prepared for a career at the church. You know what I'm saying? That's a good start, though. Yeah. I'm not the greatest fan of Henry. His dissolution of the church vanished many beautiful churches and also many old royal tombs. He was dishonored and their bones were misplaced and forgotten. True, probably not a very nice thing to do. You got to check out Alternate History Hub's video about NATO and Russia sometime. I could probably check that after this one. Martin Luther, if he made a song, I got 95 problems, but a pope ain't one. Also, many people across the realm were executed.
And out of everything Henry was taught, more than anything, he came to adore and respect theology and Catholicism.
Very
One
interesting
of Henry's
considering
tutors
the
was
context.
English poet laureate John Skelton, who wrote a textbook for Henry that we still have today. In it, he wrote a number of important lessons for the young prince, such as do not be mean, loathe gluttony, and do not violate widows. Important lessons for any 9-year-old boy.
Huh.
Around this time, Henry's older
I
brother,
wonder if
Arthur,
that's gonna
now 15 years old,
come
was married
back.
to Catherine of Aragon, sealing the union between England and Spain. And then
Spain.
he died. Oh, my
Oh.
alliance with Spain. My poor, poor alliance with Spain. And your son, sire? Oh, yes, of course, my son. But mostly my alliance with Spain. Hey, Pop, who the heck are you?
Look at the duck, and it says Drake.
Oh, yeah. And just like that, an unprepared Prince Henry was now the new heir to the throne. And how about that alliance with Spain? Well, the solution was simple.
Oh no, he's gonna want his son to marry Catherine of Aragon again? No way, man. We're about to see heads roll on Pope's cold. I always skipped Henry VIII when we're reading about history. I know everything about what came before, and I know everything what came after. That's great, man. We're about to learn.
Hey, boy, see that full-grown woman over there? That's gonna be your wife.
Oh no.
What, my brother's widow? Yes. You're a freaking weirdo, man. Now, in the Bible, there's a verse that says marrying your brother's widow.
Fuck. Guys, my camera's out. Give me a second. Give me just a quick second, guys. Just a quick seconds. I know it's a bummer, but you know the camera is out. I'm gonna connect my phone. Guys, I'm so sorry, bro. I can't believe this. Yeah, I know, man. It's fucking weird. Does it look good? Does the new camera look good? It's just my phone, but bro, I'm so sorry, guys. This was just I don't know why my camera is out, you know? Okay, perfect. I think it's weird. It's inverted. There we go. I hope that's nice. I'm so sorry. I really apologize for the the problems, but I think we're good. Perfect. Awesome, man.
Widow, that's a big no-no. So the king needed to convince the Pope and get his special permission. Hey, can I please have my son marry his brother's widow? Sure, why not? And so it was. Henry's life was turned on its head as he was moved to the royal court, next in line to the throne. But tragedy struck when just a few months later, his mother, with whom he was very close, suddenly died in childbirth.
Ooh.
The loss of his mother almost certainly had a...
You know, that's pretty interesting because all monarchs always have a problem like this. And I think, did Hitler lost his mother at a young age? I think so, right? I'm not extremely sure about that, but I think that was the case.
In his older years, King Henry VII went on a bit of a paranoid trip. As was normal for a king at the time, Henry VII had to quell a number of rebellions, and as he aged, he became ever more suspicious of the
Full Martin
nobility
Luther
around him.
album
To keep them in
featuring
check, he
95
began levying
Problems,
huge,
God's
ruinous
Plan and
fines
Sinner's
left,
Paradise.
right, and center. Dukes, bishops, barons, even his own mother. No one was safe from his tyranny. And the nobility of England began to
His
suffer.
own mother.
So when Henry
Holy.
VII finally got sick and died just after Christmas 1508,
Everyone
there
was-
was a lot of celebration. Not only because the
Everyone
tyrannical
was
Henry
happy
VII was
about it.
gone, but because his replacement was the ever-popular, charming, and handsome 18-year-old King Henry VIII. Henry married Catherine of Aragon in June 1509. You may be wondering, if it's so weird to marry your brother's widow, and since he's now king, couldn't Henry just decide not to?
Yeah.
Well, yes, he could. But by now, Henry wanted to. The
Oh.
thing about Henry...
No way. He wanted to. Bro, okay. Red flag, all right? Instant red flag. How could you want to marry your brother's widow? I don't know, man. You know what? Ancient times are just fucking weird. No, Hitler's mom died when he was around 18. Okay, so a little bit older. Hitler's little brother died early in his life, and his father was abusive. Okay, so he had other problems, not his mother.
that was unlike many kings of the time was he married for love, and he'd grown quite fond of Catherine, very fond. Historians say their marriage was unusually good.
Unusually
and so he was
good, wow.
coronated king, and what a king. Compared to his tyrannical father, he was an absolute joy. Having the blood of two royal houses, he was
that's
widely
pretty
supported.
happy, man.
He was really ridiculously good looking, and those famous calves could achieve world peace. Hey Henry, now that you're king, you know what that means. Costume party! Henry
had some
pranced
really
around the
good
palace playing
cows.
dress up with
Okay.
his friends. He wrote plays. He sang songs. He danced. A true Renaissance man, very different from the gluttonous wife killer we think of today. In his early reign, people from near and far would come to ask.
Gosh, man, I don't know what we're gonna watch, but I want to remember this. You know, a happy king, having a good time, having an unusually good marriage. Pretty interesting. Agree, they have similar customs and same thinking about certain things. Oh yeah, the difference between Protestant and Catholics. Honestly, as an atheist, I understand it, but I in practice I don't really see it, you know. In practice, they're very similar.
Generous king. Hey man, could I gain ownership of some land near Upton Snodsbury? Sure thing, pal. Hey, could I be an earl or a baron or a viscount or something? Anything you want, man. Could I get just a really cool pig that has freaking metal wings and 8 legs and shoots flippin' lasers, and it can grow more pigs out of it for extra pigs? Say no more. Hey, guys, I was just checking up on the financial report.
He's spending a lot of cash.
We can't afford this. Henry's council that he inherited from his father weren't happy with all the money he was just...
Bro, what the hell? Oh, fucking shit. Guys. I'm sorry, you know, I'm really sorry about that.
Throwing around, and they worked hard to curb the king's spending.
This is my phone, this is not the camera, so...
To get stuff done, at first, they were largely able to control the young king. And for Henry, the most infuriating things of all was they wouldn't let him joust with his friends because it was too dangerous, nor would they let him do the thing...
Oh, great, you're an atheist, something I don't like at all. Oh, well, I don't know what to say about that.
he wanted most. To go on a great,
but I'm very respectful about other people's faiths and
against
stuff.
England's historic enemy, France. Please, guys, I'll keep it cheap. How? I'm glad you asked. I've got a promo code for the financial burden of war. Yes, Honey is the free browser extension that automatically.
A promo code for a war with France.
France. Henry wanted glory. He wanted to go down in history. If he didn't go to war in France, was he even the King of England? Man, I want to go to war so bad, but the council won't let me. Hey, maybe I can.
Kind of true, though.
Whoa, it's Cardinal Wolsey, one of my best friends. Despite being an old-ass man, Cardinal Wolsey knew that if he helped King Henry, there'd likely be something in it for him. So what was his great, intricate plan to curb the council's power? You're the king, dum-dum. You can do whatever you want. What? Wolsey began writing bills that simply didn't require the seals, and thus Henry was back on top. For his efforts, Wolsey began to climb the ranks.
Kind of true, isn't it?
Something of a yes man for King Henry, encouraging Henry to frolic and play while Wolsey took care of business.
Oh, it's like the
kid,
Napoleonic
you wanna
Wars.
Go on an adventure? Do I ever? The Pope was at war with France, and he needed some help. He offered the young, impressionable King Henry 100 Parmesan cheeses, some wine, and a golden rose if he came to the Pope's aid, and Henry was all in. At this point in his life, he still respected the church and loved the Pope. And here was the chance for war he had been waiting for. He still didn't have an heir, a fairly big problem for a monarch at the time. But right now, the only kind of smashing he was interested in was smashing French guys. In the face. And
in
so
the face,
off he went.
alright.
The English already held the French city of Calais. From there, Henry made a glorious victory at the Battle of the Spurs. He took the French cities of Terouanne and Tournai. Word of his victories spread. This was it. Here was the glory he had been waiting for. Back home, his beautiful wife
was
also
winning
led armies
against
to
French.
victory in Scotland. And better yet, she was pregnant. Soon, Henry would have an heir. All of Henry's wildest dreams were coming true. Oh, he ran out of money. As the French prepared to invade Italy, all Henry could do was go home. Well, at least now I have an heir to cheer me up. Bring me my son. Henry, this is Mary. Mary? That's a funny name for a boy. Henry, it's a girl. This was Catherine's 5th pregnancy that had not resulted in a male heir. Happy Henry wasn't so happy anymore. You still haven't given me a male heir. Well, how do you know it's my problem? Maybe it's your problem, Henry. It couldn't be my problem because I've been boinking half your maidstaff and one of them gave me a boy. Sure. Yeah, you know what? Maybe it's my problem.
Yikes.
I'll look into that. Cardinal Wolsey, now Henry's Lord Chancellor, knew his job depended on keeping...
Yeah, it is. It is kind of weird to, well, interesting to think how England was Catholic for like 1,000 years.
Henry happy, and so
Definitely very
well,
different
if you can't be
when
the
you
great
think about
warrior,
England.
Then how about the great peacemaker? Not as cool, but okay. And so the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a glamorous peace summit between England and France, was held. The King of France, Francis I, was essentially the French version of King Henry, and the whole thing was basically one giant codpiece measuring contest. The two sides did agree to a peace treaty. However, it didn't last long. You see, there was a third major player in European politics at the time, an exquisite specimen of royal inbreeding, an heir to a huge inheritance, and a chin
the
hit a
Habsburg.
home run. Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He was Henry's wife's nephew. Henry had helped him out in the past to put down a Spanish rebellion, and now the two wanted to make an alliance, and so a marriage was arranged. Mary, I'd like to introduce you to your 22-year-old fully grown adult cousin, and now your future husband. Ew, he looks inbred. Mary! We're all inbred. With their new alliance, Charles and Henry agreed to
Ew, he looks inbred. No offense, but King Henry's kind of the Nick Avocado of the Middle Ages. Oh, I guess we'll see. You know, he was kind of fat.
team up and relaunch a campaign against France. In 1522, the English landed and stormed as far south as Agincourt, but Charles didn't commit significant
Sweet
forces.
home
Whoops, sorry,
Austria,
not sure what
Austria.
happened. I'll join in next year. The next year,
Oh, man,
England
that was
swept
funny.
northern
That was
France,
so funny.
almost taking Paris. But once
I
again,
rarely
where
laugh,
was
but
Charles?
gosh.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. I promise. Next year, I'll be there. The next year came, and a fed-up Henry decided he was going to sit this one out. And just as Charles ravaged the French at the Battle of Pavia and captured the French king. Holy crap, dude.
It's just
Yeah,
massive,
I totally beat France's butt. That's great. So, can I have the
Massive
first round like we
miscommunication.
agreed?
Es raro ver un mexicano reaccionando. Why? You know, there's a lot of Well, there's not. I guess that's a good thing, right? Es algo bueno.
What? And also, I don't want to marry your ugly daughter anymore. Ugly? Have you seen your chin? Mummy says it's a strong chin for a strong boy. As Henry's alliance with Charles fell apart, Henry knew his days as a warrior were over. This was a problem for Henry. but it was a
Yo,
bigger problem
I don't know why
for his
inbred
wife.
jokes are so
Catherine of
funny.
Aragon had two jobs. The first was to give Henry a male heir. But the second was to maintain an alliance with her relatives in Spain.
And it
including
ain't
her nephew.
working.
She had failed. And Henry's
Oh, he looks
sexy
like a
eyes
thing, Nick
began to wander.
Avocado.
Home from all his wars, Henry ate up his daily 5,000 calories of meat. as
There we
the
go. There's the
infatuation
Nick
began to
Avocado
grow for one of
part.
his wife's ladies in waiting, Anne Boleyn. Beautiful, intelligent, cultured. She was exactly Henry's type. Now, Henry had dozens
That's
of
my
mistresses,
type too, boy.
including Anne's sister. But Anne didn't want to just be Henry's side chick. She wanted to be his queen. Henry sent dozens of letters, thirsty love poems. In one, he proclaimed that he would like to kiss her pretty duckies. Henry's loins were
Oh,
on
is that
fire,
true?
But Anne kept him at just the right distance to drive him crazy and push him to find a way to get rid of his current wife.
So she was
Wolsey,
pretty
I want a
smart.
divorce. And as the representative of the Pope here in England, I expect you to sort it out quickly.
No, wait. No spoilers, but is the divorce gonna be the reason why he cuts the relationship with the church? I hope not. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that's not the case, man. It's gonna be so weird.
And quiet.
You know, so
I don't
freaking
want this
weird.
to turn into a Europe-wide scandal. You got it, Your Majesty. Hey, Big Papa! My boy Henry says he wants to divorce his wife. Any chance?
Big Papa.
To Henry's shock and horror, Wolsey deferred the case back to the Pope in Rome. To make matters worse, after all the
Yes.
wars in Europe,
Oh,
the Pope was
no.
currently under the thumb of Charles V. Now everybody knew
no.
what was going on, and Henry's divorce
What
trial
a
had become
scandal,
a pawn of
yeah?
greater European politics.
Holy
For Wolsey,
fuck.
the decision was a disaster. His job was to keep Henry happy. and
Yes,
Henry
that's
was
exactly
very,
why.
Very unhappy. Never
Yo, that's fucking insane, bro. England's history completely changed just for a divorce. What? I'm kind of shocked, man. I'm shocked. I'm kind of shocked, not gonna lie.
Nevertheless,
And he killed
the divorce
multiple
trial
of his-
began.
of his
Henry's
wives
case
just
rested
because
upon
of
the
that.
Bible verse
Oh,
in
man.
Leviticus that claimed marrying your brother's widow would lead to childlessness. And Henry was certainly having a hard time getting a male heir. He argued that the Pope had got it wrong when he allowed Henry to marry his brother's widow, and that now divorce was the only solution.
Oh,
However,
God
the Pope
damn.
and Charles V acquired some interesting letters from an unknown source. He wants to kiss her pretty duckies? Man, this guy's loins are on fire. The Pope now knew the case for divorce may not actually be found in Henry's Bible, but in Henry's pants. After escaping
lunatic,
Charles V, the Pope did send out one Cardinal Campeggio to oversee the trial. Campeggio was an old man racked with gout. It took him 6 painful months to travel from Rome to England, and when he finally got there, this kept happening. Hey, I need you to take a look at this evidence. I can't. My gout is acting up. Hey, are you ready to take my testimony? I can't. My gout is acting up. Hey, can you please make a decision? I can't. Your gout is acting up. My gout is acting up. Anne Boleyn, with her Protestant views in support of the Reformation, suspected the Pope was just delaying.
The Protestant Reformation. Oh God.
On and on. And
what I meant by
the
pretty
Pope simply
duckies.
said, no divorce for you. Henry, the king that had previously defended the Pope militarily from France and intellectually from the reformist ideas of
Martin Luther,
who had once respected the Pope above all, now found the Pope standing between him.
He went down a religious revolution because the king wanted to marry another woman. Yeah.
I can do whatever I want. What? For his failure, Henry removed Wolsey from the court, a decision that was likely influenced by Anne Boleyn, who disliked the cardinal. Having fallen from grace and with potential charges of treason over his head, Wolsey died of illness a year later. Then, Henry set about removing England from the influence of the Pope. Hey, if you do that, I'll excommunicate you. Who cares, man? Oh no, apathy. My weakness. Henry gathered theologians and scholars together to help him make his case against the Pope. Together, they argued to the people of England that the Pope's rule over the church was basically a takeover of what had once been a self-governing, national English church. And if that sounds familiar, some historians do believe this moment may have laid the foundations for English.
Do you get the reference? It's the red Brexit bus, pretty interesting reference, I must say. Similar to Robespierre killed people for dumb reasons. That's true, though. That's a good comparison.
Right. Brexit may have been influenced by Henry's explosive loins. By and large, the people gave Henry their support, and those that didn't were going to be in for a rough time.
There we go. There's a Robespierre influence right there.
Supreme head of the English Church, and his next divorce trial was a foregone conclusion. Catherine of Aragon was Aragon, and Anne Boleyn was in. All right, I've upended the entire country to be with you, so you'd better give me a son, okay? Now, did you get my letter about the duckies? Having finally married the girl of his dreams, it was party time for Henry, and what a party. Life in the Tudor court was non-stop, huge banquets, with each person eating on average 5,000 calories a day, and no vegetables. Those are for poor people.
That's for peasants, man, yeah.
Ate meat. And so you know what else is for rich people? Constipation. But don't let that stop the party. The toilets are communal, and Henry himself was the center of everything. He ate the best food. He had 1,200 pairs of shoes. He didn't even have to wipe his own bum. Life was great.
Oh God.
Everyone, I give you your majesty, King Henry VIII. But how did they pay for it all? Well, influenced by his fairly Protestant new wife. Since Henry had overturned the organization of the church,
Will you still watch the video on the war that changed the English language? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'll watch that.
This is how they paid for it. Oh my goodness, how awful. Selling fake fragments of the cross? Vials of Jesus' blood that you got from a duck? Using religion in this way? This is terrible. I must confiscate all this money at once. Yes, how awful. I must take all of this away immediately. Monasteries across the nation were dissolved and their riches placed in the royal coffers. Obviously, many people weren't too happy about this, but Henry had a plan for that as well. Henry's descent into tyranny had begun, as any who rejected his new claim as supreme head of the English church found their heads on the chopping block. And so Henry partied. He danced, he sang, he ate, he jousted. Be me. Love gluttony. Violate widows.
Oh. This is the moment. This is the moment that young Henry became a fucking... Well, he's not so young anymore, I guess. An asshole, yeah.
In 1536, Henry fell from his horse in a jousting accident. Not for the first time, but certainly the heaviest fall he had taken yet. Some historians believe the brain damage caused by the incident may have violently accelerated Henry's descent into tyranny.
Oh, okay,
Executions in England ramped up. During his reign, it's estimated 57 to 72,000 people were put to death.
Oh,
rich or poor,
God.
big or small, no one was safe. And the most prominent victim of all was to be Henry's own wife.
What
It had been
happened?
3 years since their marriage.
They were pretty
Anne had been
happy.
pregnant 4 times, yet she had only been able to produce one healthy child, a girl. What's more, it's possible she had been going around insulting Henry's manhood. Henry's eyes, once again, began to wander.
No.
His new top man, Thomas Cromwell, didn't want to end up like Cardinal
Cromwell.
Wolsey, and so he came up with a
That's
plan.
an interesting
There was a court
surname.
musician who had been quite flirtatious in public with the Queen. Well, Thomas Cromwell and his boys got a forced confession out of him, saying that it didn't stop at innocent flirtation, and the charges came rolling in. Listen, Anne, we need to talk. Oh no, you're going to divorce me, aren't you? Just like your last wife. Aw, no, come here. Shh, no, I'm not going to divorce you. It's much worse than that. Anne was charged with adultery, perversion,
Yo,
incest,
this is
and plotting to kill the king
messed
himself.
up,
the
man.
jury found her guilty, including her own uncle and ex-fiancé, both fearing the wrath of the king. And on May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn was Anne Boleyn. Literally the next day, Henry married one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, his third wife. After Anne had smack-talked his manhood, and since he still had no male heir, Henry went on a campaign
2 daughters.
to ensure
There's
the
the 2
public knew
daughters.
he was as virile as it gets. He had this famous portrait painted of the manliest man I've ever...
I'm assuming he's in no way related to Oliver Cromwell. Is he related to Oliver? Yeah, that was my question. I don't know if he's related to Oliver Cromwell, but it sounds interesting, at least. But yeah, this doesn't help, not very manly.
And
I mean, no
he would
hate
even
to
have
the
his
guy.
physician make a declaration about his health. King Henry is a fine specimen of a man, and please don't make me say this.
A fine.
Say it. And every time I look at him, I wish I was a woman. The truth is, after his jousting accident, the king had badly injured his leg and was no longer
just
very
had
active,
daughters.
Yet he was still
Apparently
eating his daily
so.
5,000 calories. So by now, Henry was extremely unhealthy. For the remainder of his life, he would incur a number of illnesses. and
Oh man, there's I guess the Nick Avocado
leg
part,
ulcers would ooze
the modern Nick
a
Avocado.
fine specimen of a man indeed. On the church front, Henry's new
Oh,
and
God.
now pregnant wife was a devout Catholic, and she pleaded with the king to reinstate the monasteries. Henry was sick of wives meddling in his business, and he bluntly warned her to remember.
I
what
just hope
happened to
I just
Anne
hope he
Boleyn.
doesn't kill
Since
her.
splitting with
you
the
know?
Pope, Henry had been hard at work determining
I
the
really hope
theology
that.
of his new Church of England. It kept many Catholic traditions, while on the other hand embracing some reformist ideas, such as requiring the use of a new Bible not in Latin, but in English. The cover of
Whoa,
Henry's
that's
new
a
Bible
pretty
depicted
big
the people
deal.
appearing to worship a giant King Henry. And in the corner, there's some people being put to death, just for good measure. For any who opposed Henry's ideas, whether Catholic or Protestant, for any who rebelled against him, it would be off with their heads. In October 1537, Henry finally got what he had been waiting for. His wife Jane gave birth to a healthy boy. However, the triumph soon turned to tragedy, as Jane Seymour died days later from complications during the birth. Henry mourned Jane, the woman who had given him a son, for 2
Oh
years.
man.
Your Majesty, it's time to choose your next wife. Thomas! Not now!
Come on, Cromwell.
Can't you see I'm in mourning? That one. The woman Thomas Cromwell had lined up for Henry's next
Anne
marriage
of
was the
Cleves?
sister of a powerful German duke. But all Henry cared about was that she was pretty as pie. And Thomas Cromwell promised that indeed she was. However, when she arrived in England, Henry was less than pleased. Your Majesty, let me introduce you to your fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. What's that smell? I think it's your legs, sire. No, it's Anne of Cleves. She's ugly. This is treason. What?
Come
Off
on,
with his
bro.
head.
How fucking dare you talk about ugly? Have you look at your fat infected ass?
Henry found his new wife so repulsive that he never consummated the marriage and divorced her just 6 months later. And for bringing Henry an ugly, stinky woman, along with additional charges of plotting treason.
No. He killed Cromwell for bringing him an ugly. I mean, she doesn't look that ugly. Like, I mean, it's hard to judge someone by a painting, but I don't know. I don't think she deserves to be. Cromwell deserves to be killed for that.
Treason. Thomas Cromwell lost his head. The very same day of Cromwell's execution, Henry married
The
his
very
fifth wife, the famed
very
beauty,
same day.
Catherine Howard. She's believed to have only been 17 at the time. Henry was 49, and
Oh,
like Anne
God.
of Cleves, Catherine Howard
Yikes.
didn't last long. You see, for some reason, she may not have been entirely satisfied with her 49-year-old fine
specimen of a man,
and it's possible she engaged in a number of extramarital affairs, including one with her cousin, Thomas Culpeper. When Henry found out, he was devastated. How could she do this to me?
Yikes.
But, sire, don't you have hundreds of mistresses? Shut up.
Top 10 British betrayals. At this point, you could look at him the wrong way, and it's off your head. Truly,
Barry, that's not
it really
the
sounds
point.
Like that.
Your Majesty, you're crying. I'm not crying. It's just that sometimes when I get sad, water comes out of my eyes. For her treason, Catherine Howard met the same fate as Anne Boleyn in 1542.
Off with her head.
So we've had divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded. Look out! Here comes survivor.
Another
Henry married the daughter
one.
of a royal official,
Oh, God.
Catherine Parr, in 1543, and she appears to have been a good companion to Henry. She cared for the aging king, who by now was so heavy it took several men to winch him onto his horse. She acted as a mediator within the family and convinced the king to restore his two daughters to the line of succession. Their marriage did have one hiccup, however, when Catherine dared disagree with the king over the subject of theology. It's a miracle
Ooh.
because when the priest says the words of institution, the
Be
bread turns
careful,
into the
be
body of
careful
Christ.
there.
Well, if you put the bread in a box for 3 months, is it a miracle that it turns moldy? Treason! You can't just call everything treason, Henry. The king called for her arrest as serious charges were placed over her head. However, in the end, she told Henry that she had not been disagreeing with him, but simply learning from him. And so when the guards came to arrest her, the king told them to make like an Anne and cleave. Catherine Parr stayed with Henry
What?
right until the end. As he aged into his later years, in increasing pain and ill health, he grew ever more suspicious and moody. The once generous, promising young king was now feared by all around
It's
him.
pretty sad, though.
Sigmund, I don't have much longer. Hold me. Of course, sire. Do you have any final wishes? How about one last conquest in France? And so in 1544, Henry made for Calais. The pesky French had been supporting the Scottish in their ongoing wars with England, and they also owed Henry some money. So the extremely unhealthy king personally led a siege against the French city of Boulogne. The English dug tunnels into the castle,
wow.
and on the 13th of
I
September,
wasn't
the
expecting
French
that at all.
a glorious victory for Henry. In actuality, the whole misadventure nearly bankrupted England, and they ended up giving Boulogne back to the French a few years later.
Oh.
But shh, don't tell Henry. He's having his moment. Finally,
Yeah,
in 1547, a 55-year-old Henry, lapsing in and out of consciousness, passed away. His son, Edward, succeeded him, but died just 5 years later. His daughter, Mary, briefly took the reins and steered the country back towards the Pope. But then his second daughter embraced reformist ideas and gradually transformed England into a Protestant country. Henry's desperation to marry Anne Boleyn and his
Elizabeth
resulting
I.
feud had changed the course of English history.
Holy
and
shit, Elizabeth I. That's pretty good. Will you do Invicta though? I think I'm only gonna do one more video. Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn were cousins. Oh, Jesus. Let's do the War of the English Language. Oh.
And religion forever. Unfortunately, none of Henry's children had heirs, and when Elizabeth I died, Henry's lineage ended, with the House of Stuart replacing the House of Tudor. So then you might think, all that effort, a life filled with so much frustration, yet he never
For
conquered
nothing.
France. He barely had a male heir, and his lineage died out. The egotistical man Henry grew sick and cruel, and then died. So why are we all so fascinated with King Henry VIII? Why not Henry II or IV? Well, without mentioning the many important things his reign did achieve, one of his biggest goals was to go down in history. And you can put a big green check beside that one.
Yeah.
Because everything he did...
Maybe not for the right reasons, but okay, you know. Did you watch Alexander the Great and the Opis Mutiny? That's an epic speech for history. I haven't watched that. Elizabeth ruled for like 44 years. Her rule is seen as one of England's golden ages. Yeah, I've heard that Elizabeth I was pretty important, so that's why I was shocked. Like, wow, that was Elizabeth I. Her daughter, pretty interesting, pretty great connection, I guess. Fun fact about Mary: she married Philip II of Spain, and so they had a child. So if they had children, England would have joined the Iberian Union. Pretty interesting alternative history.
How he asserted his control and authority over
Well, it's not
everyone around
alternative. It
him has come
happened,
to be
but
viewed as the epitome
it's interesting
of
to
the
think.
word king. And also because of the wife killings. Yeah, definitely the wife killings.
That was pretty fun. I really enjoyed this video. I don't know why I never watched it though. Pretty fun. Okay, let's watch one more because my camera died and I'm recording with my phone and I don't know how reliable that is. But let's watch one more. Should we watch? Let's watch and let's not watch one of Oversimplified. You know, let's change it a little bit. Any recommendations on the chat? I was gonna watch Geography Now, but I'll watch it later. Also, this one, and this one. You know, there's some good videos for later. She probably wouldn't. She probably would have children if she just lived longer. Her reign was very short, like 6 years, I think. Marian Russia video by Is that like a video or a channel? Geography Now. I would do Geography Now, but it's long and I'm afraid my phone is gonna fail. So I rather have that later. NATO and Russia, I mean. Okay, yeah, let's watch that. You tell me, is it this one? Did NATO really betray Russia? I think it's this one, right? It looks pretty interesting. Oh, and it's like a fundraiser, $14,000, guys. If it's in your possibilities to donate some money, I think that'd be a very noble cause to donate. Yeah, NATO and Russia. Okay, perfect.
You might be wondering, how did it come to this? How, even after the USSR fell, did Russia go down such a different path than NATO?
Yeah.
Was there ever perhaps some possibility that these...
It's a pretty good question, though. And when we were talking about Ukraine, I was like, I don't think it's smart for Russia to be so aggressive against NATO. I think it'd be better for the Russian people and the Russian country as a whole to just be closer to NATO. It's not the Cold War anymore. There's no
after the end of the Cold War.
There's no
would
reason
have
for
came
that.
Together in peace, because apparently Putin seems
pretty
to
dumb.
think so, or at
Yeah.
least he says so. His current track record with the truth isn't the best, by the way.
You really think someone would do that?
Putin says Russia wanted to join NATO, but NATO didn't let them. Is there truth to this?
Oh, well,
The
maybe
answer
there's
to
some
why
truth.
Russia didn't join NATO is a story about a former superpower rebuilding itself from the ground up. How Russia, or at least the Duma and Putin, viewed their status in regards to the West. So first, the question we're all asking. When it comes to this whole situation, who's to blame for this? It's Putin. 100%. This was all Putin. Even if NATO had done some bad things, even if Russia had some fair points about their expansion, even if NATO took over Ukraine, like Putin says, you still can't invade others. Like, it was bad when the US did it in Iraq. It's even worse when Putin does it now. 1991.
I
the fall of
agree,
the USSR.
100%.
Russia is weak and wants assurance from the US and NATO that they wouldn't spread east of Germany. Eastern Europe could be like a neutral ground, and the United States informally agreed. Or, well, George H.W. Bush.
And that's another thing. It's an informal agreement. It's not they signed the treaty, right? So it's just
Agreed.
informal.
Verbally.
Yeah.
We can't show any weakness in front of the Russians.
This was never an actual written agreement. It was just an understanding. Oh, also, I was lying. This agreement wasn't made with Russia after the fall of the USSR, but before, with Gorbachev. The importance of this agreement really depends on who you ask. For avid Russian supporters, this was a legitimate, sometimes legal agreement that NATO promised and then broke. For NATO, their promise not to move east was an informal verbal agreement that doesn't matter. Throughout the last century, there have been multiple...
Plus, it was, if we're going to look at technicalities, it was an agreement made with the Soviet Union, not Russia. Technically very separate, very different entities.
Discussions between NATO and the Russians over their
I don't know about
relationship
that, Chief.
with NATO. The first one, at least of note, was in 1990, where the United States agreed not to move east into East Germany, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The USSR, though weakened, was still a prominent power, and NATO verbally agreed that they would never move in to Germany. And then the Soviets collapsed. Now, when talking about how important these promises were to the Soviets, we will never really know. Even Gorbachev flip-flops on how important these assurances actually were. What's more interesting is the constant...
Recommend JJ McClellow, Canada's weird left-wing anti-American nationalism. For sure, we'll watch it.
Mention
Not
of the
now, I don't think, but...
CSCE. Never heard of it? It's because it never really panned out like it was truly planned. Whether or not any of this was true or just bluster, this talk of a united umbrella was seen as a viable possibility in the early 90s, before the USSR even fell. This is what Gorbachev and the Russians heard. Russia, at least if the Soviets fell, would be joining a united Europe. And then Clinton was elected. It's 1992, baby. The Soviets are
the 90s.
dead.
Where are all
Bush,
my 90s
despite
kids?
overseeing the fall of the Soviet Union and bombing Saddam's forces back into Iraq,
In Kuwait,
still promised to not raise taxes.
Read
My lips.
And then he raised taxes.
No more taxes. Yeah.
So he was voted out. NATO was seen as a relic of an age that no longer existed. It was an active discussion in the 90s what the fate of NATO should even be. It was a stringently anti-communist alliance that no longer had a communism to fight. And yet...
It's kind of NATO's bad for pushing Russia away. Russia tried to join NATO on multiple occasions, but were refused. I honestly would have to read more on that. Maybe he's gonna mention it. I get it, you know.
NATO stayed.
NATO
now
did
let me
push
take out this big
Russia
button.
away, but but of course we have this point, right?
I should iterate that the Russians are not simply victims in this. For Central Europe, nations like Poland, Hungary, Romania, and even other nations like the Baltic states.
It must have been strange for someone born during the Cold War to look at a map after 1991 and seeing all these new independent nations. True, there's no more Soviet Union anymore, no more Yugoslavia, and I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting. Sudan,
under
maybe,
Soviet
kind of.
control for
I don't know.
decades. As soon as the Warsaw Pact fell, there was a real home.
The 90s were wacky for East and West.
Or at
True,
least get
though.
some protection from the West in case anything happened again. Would anything happen again? Who knows? The West didn't know, the Russians didn't know, and this was kind of the basis of Clinton sort of keeping NATO around. We're into 1993. Russia is
Pablo
slowly
Escobar.
rebuilding, with a few hiccups along the way. Clinton comes to Boris Yeltsin with a proposal, a partnership for peace. All of Europe now coming together. Nobody would need to expand NATO if we all were just in this partnership together. And then Clinton drops the bombshell on Yeltsin. This whole partnership for peace was not an alternative to the expansion of NATO. It was a preparation for it. To which Yeltsin replied, why? NATO was created in Cold War times. Today it's trying to find its place in Europe, not without difficulty. It's important that this search not create new divisions, but promote European unity. We believe that the plans of expanding NATO are contrary to this logic. Why sow the seeds of distrust? After all, we're no longer adversaries. We are partners. Yet the plans continued. Poland, Hungary, and Czechia soon joined NATO. Yet this wasn't the breaking point in relations. Russia still remained a part of the NATO cooperation sphere. There was an optimistic view that the kinks in this whole thing were slowly being worked out. Now, keep in mind, this whole time, NATO is entirely justified in what they're doing. They're technically not doing anything wrong. But from the Russian mindset, going from a communist superpower to a mafia state, where this man is their leader, well, they felt nothing but shame.
If China gets their way, they would backstab Russia and make them their puppet. I think that's what probably China would do.
That fear and paranoia
maybe that's
only
their plan,
began
I
to
don't know.
grow, and it became manifested when this guy came to power. But even with Putin in office and him winning the presidency through some zany means, Russia was still somewhat friendly with the US. Yet that was going to change.
All right.
In 2004, NATO, under Bush's push, brought in 7 new nations. Now, once again, if these nations wanted to join NATO, that's fine. But after a decade of this, Russia became paranoid that NATO was simply out to get them. And then Bush welcomes in these nations as escaping an evil empire.
The door to NATO will remain open until the whole of Europe is united in freedom and in peace.
You can even go back to
The
articles
whole
in
of Europe.
2004 where
That
people
includes
say
Russia, though. I think NATO maybe wasn't the best at handling the situation, but at the same time, Russia was hard on cooperating, especially under Putin, you know. Friends by circumstance, true. China and Russia, friends by circumstance. My Spanish teacher was from Peru and met Pablo Escobar while he was playing for the Peruvian basketball team. Holy shit.
Russia's going to change
What
their
a
foreign
story,
policy.
man.
The Russian Duma began
Very interesting.
freaking out, and the first man they ran to was a violent Putin. Georgia was invaded 4 years later.
That's true. I agree with that. Trump said something I agree with, which is that Russia needs China's money and China needs Russian materials. So oil, gas, probably more things that I'm not thinking straight. I think Russia produces steels, right?
Keep in mind
Steel
when I
and-
say Russians, I don't mean all Russians. I mean the Russian government, which should usually be clear, but I just know some of you are going to try to use that as a gotcha. One question may be on your mind. After the Cold War, why didn't the Russians just join NATO if they were so afraid of it? General opposition to the West, for one. Russia, even while the USSR was collapsing, didn't want to view this as a defeat. They wanted to view this as a new age. Then it turns out only their institutions fell. But there's also another reason why Russia didn't join. NATO is not simply an alliance, it's a structured machine. When a nation joins NATO, it is not simply changing to the blue team. The way its military is organized becomes based around being able to work within that machine. A country joining NATO is a process that takes years. This isn't a process that simply happens. For one, a nation joining NATO has to be unanimously accepted by everyone. And it also has to be voted on by that nation's population. As an example, Hungary in 1997 voted 85% in favor of joining. Would the Russian people ever have accepted to join an organization that they believed was an arm of the American Empire?
No.
The rule of geopolitics is the closer you are to a superpower, the more they mingle and try to control your nation. And that's what Russia really views a lot of their neighbors as, just pawns on a board for which they, as the stronger nation, have the right
And that's the problem with Ukraine right there. People probably started seeing a bad change in Russia when they invaded Chechnya and Georgia. True.
Control.
That happened like
Their
in
goals
2008,
Europe
right?
Simply drive others away from them. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. NATO expansion closer to Russia only made them more paranoid and isolated. However, if NATO didn't expand, who's to say what countries like Estonia might find themselves in right now?
Yeah.
It's clear Putin has some fantasy about rebuilding the Russian Empire, or at least the influence of the USSR. This video is not about two equally bad camps. NATO's greatest sin, at least in this regard, is leaving its doors wide open. It's been said that Americans should imagine what it'd be like if Canada fell to Chinese influence. Complaining that your geopolitical rival lied about letting your former allies into their compass club doesn't make you look like a victim. Nobody would feel sorry for the United States if China took Canada. They would laugh. Oh wait, actually we don't need a hypothetical. The same situation happened with the US too, with Cuba. And we know how the US would react when a neighbor turns to the enemy's side.
Could you react to History of Monsters by What If Alt Hist? Yeah, man, for sure. Russia should have a shared culture of orthodoxy and history by the Russian government. Yeah, I agree with that.
Keep them sanctioned for decades, which, here's a little tip, is a bad thing to do too. Whataboutism is used a lot by pro-Putin supporters, bringing up every transgression the U.S. has ever done.
Oh, yeah, I fucking hate that.
And it's true the United States has done a lot of bad things.
That's a really bad
Iraq,
argument.
for instance. That was bad. It's funny it's being used as an equivalent, because people in the West at the time protested the war without disappearing. The closest the U.S. had to censoring opposition to the Iraq War was when the country industry killed off the Dixie Chick's career. Can Russians today say the same thing? Or are they not even allowed to call this a war, but a military operation? That said, we should be asking some questions to ourselves.
It's true, though.
Did NATO still need...
I think China would steal Siberia because Russia doesn't have the resources or population. I think that'd be a pretty big move. I don't think they would do that. China tends to act a little bit more quietly than Russia. But that'd be an interesting scenario. Guys, we're 17 viewers.
After the Soviets
Let's
fell.
go, man.
Did
Thank
NATO
y'all so
existing
much.
push Russia towards a nationalistic paranoia in its reforming years that undermined the same liberal democracy that the West was trying to plant within the country? Was NATO obligated to give Russian interests the time of day? Do geopolitics even work like that? For my personal opinion, I believe that the Russians had far different expectations for what a post-Soviet world would look like. The Russians believed, in part because of those 1990 talks involving East Germany, that with the end of the Warsaw Pact, NATO wouldn't expand. That instead there would be some coalition in Europe where Russia has special...
Did you see that there are Syrians going to Ukraine to help Putin? As a reaction, people across the world going to help Ukraine. I heard that. I heard that both Putin is asking for fighters or for volunteers, and that a lot of people from the Middle East, particularly Syria, were joining joining Russia. Pretty bizarre. You should watch. The 12 wars we never heard of. We watched that first, bro. That was the first video we watched. Nukes are still a thing, so China will stay away. That's true. That's, nukes are
While
a thing.
to the Americans, they
and
took
Russia
the
has a
fall
lot
of
of
the
nukes.
USSR as a victory. Their promises to the Soviets were when the Warsaw Pact still existed. With the collapse, the Americans now oversaw a Central and Eastern Europe that was eager to join in the economic prosperity of the West. It was a complicated act balancing these nations while also trying to not exclude the Russians. A Europe that Russia claimed it wanted to be in. Yet Russia only became more and more isolated. While much of this discussion is around NATO, this is simply one element. NATO, up until recent events, didn't actually move their military equipment past those original 1991 borders.
The
main issue the Russian government has isn't just a military...
Until recent events, and that's why we've gotten a lot of news. NATO's military is moving into Poland. Could you react to Chechen in Ukraine? Yeah, is there a specific video or specific news? Or just in general?
But Western institutions. Or at least institutions that don't serve their interests. If Putin wasn't blaming
Oligarchs.
NATO, the problem would be something else. Like, I don't know, the whole thing that started this in the first place. Like Ukrainians wanting to join the European Union. Putin's Russia really has been their own worst enemy for a while, as every hostile action, every threat, every influence, every corrupt politician has only made their former allies turn against them. It's always good to try to see from all perspectives, yet not all perspectives are equal. Sometimes the perspective is simply that another nation was a mistake to exist. Sometimes it's that the collapse of the USSR was the most catastrophic event of the 20th century. Even if there was a kernel of truth to the idea that NATO misled the Russians, it does not justify their
Bill
actions.
Clinton.
Should Putin really be talking about how misleading is bad? Kind of seems like that was their strategy for the last few months.
Would Cuba send people for Russia? I don't think so. There will be other countries that would have sent. I don't think that Cuba or Venezuela and other countries allied to Russia want to make the U.S. and the West angry. The Russian sanctions have been pretty brutal, so I don't think Cuba or Venezuela need more sanctions.
NATO is not a perfect organization. However, if the nations of Europe want to join this club, it should always be their right. Russia expected the continent to remain a neutral ground for their own interests, even after their pact collapsed. And when that didn't happen, they claimed no fair. You do not start wars over verbal agreements that happened before most of your troops were even born. We cannot forget that this all is coming down to a real war within a split nation. A war that, while true has been raging for 8 years, only began because the Russian side didn't have their guy in charge anymore. One that escalated into an invasion of an independent nation, which regardless of the justification, only justifies the fears of Russia's enemies. So, yeah, congrats Putin. You were the monster that proved NATO was right to build up. While this alliance didn't know what it was going to be in the mid-90s, it sure does know now. You didn't want to be a part of Europe, and now you get your wish.
Yikes. Holy shit. With Russia shrinking, aging population, and large numbers of people emigrating out of the country, I wonder if Putin worries that they might not be able to maintain their nukes. Possibly true. I definitely think that the shrinking population had something to do with Putin making the decision right now, you know? It's now or never, basically. The more their population ages, the smaller their military gets, the smaller their economy gets. It's just a big problem that they can ask Japan, that it really hits hard. There's talks of taking Russian oligarch homes in London and not allowing Ukrainian refugees to live in them for a while, and allowing Ukrainian refugees to live for a while. That's pretty funny. You know, I could see that. I don't know how easy or complicated that would be, but you know, it's a fun little way to punish Putin and his allies, because you know he's friends with a lot of oligarchs. So can you blame him? I don't support American sanctions on Russia. It's just making the current gas crisis even worse. I agree. Especially, I've heard that in America, gas prices are being pretty bad, you know, pretty high. But I don't know, man. You can't just sit and watch, you know. If there's no sanctions, basically America would be sitting and watching while Ukraine gets pummeled. And the sanctions, I know they're pretty rough on the American people and the American people's wallets, but they are being so much more devastating on Russia. And I'm sure that they're soon gonna surrender or make peace with Ukraine or back down, and it's gonna work. I really think it's gonna work. 15 viewers, guys. Should we watch another video? This one was magnificent. I must say, I really, really enjoyed this one. But oh, there's one interesting right here. I'm gonna watch it later. For a video, not for the stream. History of Monsters. You're right. Let's watch that one. Oh. The logistics of the Roman army. I think we'll save that for another stream. Oh, but it's a little long. I want to watch a shorter video. You know, I'll save this for another.
I got into history
stream
primarily when I was a child,
but I would want to watch something shorter. Okay, let's watch. Yeah, perfect. Let's end the stream with this one. But is that a video though? Tarkov, is that a video or a news source or? Let's end the stream with this one, and I'll do a stream very soon. I'm gonna save all these videos, you know, for the next stream.
due to my love of mythology.
Oh,
However,
nope. So we're gonna end the stream with this one. I think it's gonna be pretty fun.
Hey everyone, we got a lot of great feedback.
Also, glad you're doing better. Thank you, brother. I really appreciate the support, and you know, people just asking
on our episode covering how
it's
Roman
really,
soldiers
really
prepared dinner.
Nice.
So much so that I figured we would do a quick overview of Roman supplies and logistics. But before we get started, I did want to give you a shout out for Ancient Warfare magazine. Specifically, I wanted to refer you to their issue number 7, which deals with logistics and army trains of the late Roman Empire. And
oh, is it like a sponsor?
So during campaigns, one of the general's greatest concerns was the need to feed. And this was especially true of the Roman army, which relied on robust supplies to wage highly aggressive warfare at all times of year. I want to start by giving you a...
Which is pretty interesting that the Roman army, sorry about the voice, had supply chains for their foods and resources, when even armies in like the 1700s used techniques like living off the land. Not very few armies, but they still used it. So this seems to be pretty modern.
Sense of the scales.
Of course, the
involved
Roman
here.
army was a wonder of its
would be the
time.
individual soldiers. These each carried much of their own gear, which is estimated to have weighed around 40 kilograms. Additionally, each contubernium of 8 soldiers had a mule or 2 and a pair of military slaves to help them carry supplies. This meant that each legion was accompanied by around 600 to 1,000 mules and 1,200 slaves. The entire army's baggage train was therefore made up of thousands of pack animals and slaves, as well as hundreds of wagons, and even more multitudes of non-combatants. Such a large force had significant supply needs to sustain
It is absolutely true.
Just for context, De Re Militari suggests that on a daily basis, a legion required 18,000 pounds of grain, 12,000 gallons of water, and 40,000 pounds of fodder for its animals. That is a lot of food and water.
A lot of water, yeah.
So now we can discuss the way that this was achieved by the Romans. How did they get all this? Well, I think it's best to break down the sources of supply into several different levels. The first level is going to be the supplies carried with the army. The second one is going to be supplies gathered by the army. And then the third one is going to be supplies sent to the army. So let's start with the first one, supplies with the army. Well, at the lowest level, each soldier was expected to have some supplies on hand. This amounted to approximately 1 week's worth of food.
That must be pretty heavy, though. Imagine carrying for yourself 1 week worth of food. It seems to be pretty difficult to be charging
some
that.
flexibility whilst
Carrying
on
that.
campaign. In case of true emergencies, the soldiers could even eat hardtack or perhaps boil some of the leather on their shields or shoes to eat. But that was really stretching it. Next, you'd have the army's baggage train, which had significantly more supplies. They carried a ton of goods along with herds of animals for consumption, and this overall might be enough to last a month or more. Though it should be noted that things like water and fodder were actually impractical to carry in large quantities, and that these would be in constant need of resupply. So now let's move on to the next level, supplies gathered by the army whilst in the field. These were gathered in approximately 3 main ways.
Which this must have been
through
pretty
foraging,
huge,
requisition, and pillaging. Foraging involves essentially living off the land, and it was done
The
relatively
Roman legion was
routinely,
well fed when it
especially
came to
when
fight.
searching out water, fodder, and firewood. The yield of such activities would depend on the season. So obviously, when the crops are ripe and they're in the field and there's lots of fruits, etc., you might get a high yield, whereas in the winter, these activities would have a low yield. And then the amount of supplies that you can gather does very much depend on the size of your foraging expeditions and how far away you send them. So all of these would vary over time. The other major way that you could gather supplies would be
Pillaging
through
a village.
requisition, and this involved the purchase or seizure of goods. And then the last way would be pillaging, which involved gathering supplies alongside the destruction of property. And typically these last two, requisition and pillaging, were associated with population centers. So using these kind of 3 general principles of how an army gathered supplies, you can imagine sort of what its activities looked like as it advanced at a pace of around 20 miles a day. Yet the army could not always count on gathering all of its own supplies. And this is where this third level comes in, where the Roman army logistics systems get involved. So now let's talk about supplies to the army.
That's probably the most interesting one. You know, how do you send supplies to the army at that time? Do you send people? Definitely very interesting.
The most important fundamental feature here is going to be the supply line. And this is the connection between the army and a supply source. And if you imagine this line, there's going to be a couple fixed points that are going to be important to talk about. And these are roughly broken up into different tiers, different types of bases.
And that's why you can cut an army's supply line, and that'd be devastating.
They're going to be the strategic base of supply, the operational base, and then the tactical base. So the strategic base is kind of the most broad, and this is going to be your source. And it's not necessarily a single point, but a broad source of provisions from outside an area of operations. Generally, we're talking about provinces, which were assigned specific armies or campaigns to support. And these supplies were gathered using various financial means, including forced and market purchases, contracting, taxation, and contributions from allies.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, outside of the theater of operations across the empire or several provinces, you'd be gathering and collecting all this food. So that's your strategic base with reference to an army. Then these would be carried over and collected at the operational base. And the operational base is going to be essentially the supply line's anchor. And this is the base
like a big city,
that was meant to
big
supply
town.
the Roman army in its particular area of operations. Fundamentally, it linked the waterborne supply lines coming
Sorry if I don't have much commentary, but I'm just enjoying it. I don't know much, like I said like an hour ago, much about ancient history. That's like my weakest knowledge point, but hey, I'm just enjoying the ride.
And connected them to the land-based supply lines going to the next level, which is going to be your tactical base. So these operational bases, as I said, which are the anchors of the supply lines, were usually located at fortified ocean or river ports, though the location may be updated over the course of a campaign for a strategic...
Imagine being the person responsible for the Roman legion's food. I would not last a day. True, a very important job, and probably you would be held accountable.
Strategic or tactical reasons, as for instance, maybe an army was getting close and you had to move it because your operational base was threatened, or perhaps...
But if you manage the supplies, it's going to check if maybe some meat was missing. True.
You took control of another port and you...
I mean, that's true though, but there's always someone that realizes it at the end of the day. I mean, that's kind of how corruption works nowadays, right? If you're managing your country's money, technically nobody's going to notice it, but eventually a slip happens, right? A mistake. So I imagine in the Roman days would be fairly similar. Someone just notices something going
wanted
wrong.
To move your operational base closer to your army. So
I don't know,
operational bases could move. These bases also traditionally contained infrastructure to hold enough food and equipment for the campaigning season, and in particular included sophisticated granaries, which were key in minimizing food spoilage. If this particular infrastructure wasn't necessarily there or didn't have, the maximum amount needed for the campaign, the soldiers would probably get involved in building these prior to launch of the campaign. So that's your operational base, again, the supply line's anchor. Now the next level is going to be the tactical base. So the tactical base is essentially the other endpoint. It's the far end of the supply line. And this is where the supply collection point is closest to the Roman force. It would traditionally be a short distance behind the army or within its own marching camp. And this is where
it's amazing how sophisticated it was, including sea routes, the strategic base, operational base, and now you got a tactical base. Very, very sophisticated.
For supplies arriving from the operational base through that supply line. And then it's also where you would gather the supplies that the Legion is, getting locally from living off the land. So this all would be dumped into the tactical base. The tactical base might also contain some of the Roman army's slower moving elements, such as siege equipment. And as the army
the heavy
forward,
equipment, right?
Again, about 20 miles a day, this tactical base...
Yeah, I would imagine they would set up more tactical bases, or the tactical base would be moved as along with the army.
Would be picked up and moved alongside the army. So
Makes
it would kind of trail
sense,
it and advance
right?
with it or alongside it. Now, in its wake, as it moves along and redeploys, you're going to have a series of abandoned tactical bases. And these were traditionally converted into supply depots, which would go on to become the backbone of the supply line. And troops were generally left behind to garrison these. So when you're thinking of supply lines, it's not going to be a long line of wagons that goes continuously from one end to the other.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be smaller convoys that are moving between these chains of depots that finally lead up to that tactical base. And this is going to be very, very key because it allows men and animals to get the necessary rest and fodder that they need along the way instead of making a single long...
And you gotta think, this was not the 1500s, 1600s. This was the year 300, 400, right? Very, very advanced for its time.
That would be very vulnerable to attack, etc. And then another important thing is that between these...
Invicta's videos around everyday management, from shopping, trade, taxes, always so underrated. Real determinants of history are culture, economics, logistics, strategy, and tactics. Yeah, that's true. People should be more into these videos.
These depots, etc.
I personally enjoy videos like
as
this.
these convoys are making their way,
this is what I consume on my daily basis.
Build up roads, bridges, and canals.
Not this, but
to improve the efficiency of these supply routes. And this is why you always hear so much about roads and infrastructure in the Roman world, because a lot of the times these were built up for military purposes to make these supply lines going to the army that much more efficient and
all
strong.
roads
So it's not
lead
only
to
just
Rome.
the Roman soldiers moving, but also their equipment and supplies coming up after them. So yeah, that's it for the coverage, the overview, I should say, of Roman army supply lines and logistics. There's a ton more to this, but I just wanted to give you a pretty generic and cursory overview. But even at that, I think...
Yeah, that was pretty good. I really, really enjoyed that. This is, like I said, the kind of videos that I would watch on, like, when I'm not streaming, right? I'm just, like, chilling. But thank you all so much. I wish we could do more, but my camera died. But you guys have no idea how happy I am to be back streaming, and how happy I am that after a couple of weeks you guys that didn't forgot, or you know, you kept me in your thoughts and you were writing comments about it. Maybe I didn't respond to all of them, but I really read them all and kept them in my heart, and were really, really important for me to kind of not only to come back, but as to, you know, kept going while I was sick. And it's kind of hard to explain, but thank you all so Is that any different? Yeah. Bro, I was giving a pretty fun speech, and then the microphone dies. You know, what a fucking bummer. Anyways, just thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support and your comments. I really appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next stream. Peace out. Have a good night, day, whatever is in your country. Thank you all again.